Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Raymond Wright. On January 11, 2018, in Sacramento, California, Dean Wright grew increasingly anxious as he waited for his brother. They had planned to meet earlier that day, but Dean was unable to reach Raymond. The brothers were close, talking every day and maintaining a strong relationship. But suddenly, Raymond disappeared without a trace. There were no calls, no texts, and no activity on social media. He stopped posting photos, stopped visiting his personal page, and stopped answering the phone. Raymond, a 55-year-old carpenter, owned his own workshop and was known for being skilled at managing his business. Occasionally, he would drop off the radar, but never for more than half a day, usually due to work-related matters. This time, however, Raymond had been missing for an entire day, leaving his close friends and family deeply concerned. His sister called Dean, asking if he knew where Raymond was. Raymond's two daughters were also worried. They had noticed their father's unusually long absence and contacted Dean to share their concerns. The girls said they had tried calling their father all day, but their calls kept going to voicemail. Dean, growing increasingly worried, repeatedly called Raymond's number but had no success. That evening, he decided to visit Raymond's home in a suburb of Sacramento. Raymond also rented a nearby woodworking shop, which was doing well. Unfortunately, Dean found no sign of his brother in either the house or the shop. There were no indications of forced entry or robbery. Dean, who was familiar with both the house and the shop, carefully inspected the premises but found nothing unusual or any clues about Raymond's whereabouts. To add to the mystery, Raymond's pickup truck was also missing. At this point, Dean began to panic. Raymond had disappeared without any notice or plans to leave, leaving his family at a loss as to where to look. The situation left everyone worried, including Raymond's ex-wife. She and Raymond got married in June 1994. For many years, they tried to build a happy family. However, after some time living together, their differences in life views began to cause problems. Raymond was busy setting up a business, which made him completely absorbed in work and often neglectful of his daily family life. In 2001, the couple divorced. The children stayed with their mother, but Raymond remained actively involved in raising them and often visited them. After the divorce, Raymond stayed single for many years, avoiding the idea of starting a new family due to his heavy workload. In 2009, he remarried, but this marriage did not last long and ended in divorce that same year. According to relatives and friends, Raymond became extremely depressed because he was unable to maintain a personal life, largely due to his work addiction. This eventually led him to turn to alcohol. He had struggled with drinking since his early 20s but had quit when he first got married, maintaining a sober lifestyle for many years. Both his first and second wives confirmed that he had abstained from alcohol throughout their marriages. His second divorce had a profound impact on him, causing his life to spiral out of control. Struggling to cope, Raymond turned to heavy drinking, which led to serious problems. Although he was never aggressive or short-tempered, alcohol made him stubborn and reckless. In November 2011, after drinking heavily, he decided to drive under the influence. He lost control of his vehicle and caused an accident. The drivers and passengers in the other car involved were injured and filed a lawsuit against him for drunk driving. As a result, Raymond was sentenced to 18 months of probation and required to pay a substantial fine. This incident served as a wake-up call for him, and he immediately quit drinking. Determined to change, he joined Alcoholics Anonymous and attended daily meetings, fully committing to overcoming his addiction. During this time, his family and friends stood by him, offering their unwavering support. They noticed significant improvements in his behavior and overall health. It seemed as though he had found a new purpose in life, eager to make up for the time he had lost with his loved ones due to his struggle with addiction. From then on, he stopped drinking and started spending more time with his family. He even made a beautiful baby crib in his woodworking shop for his niece. He planned to spend the holidays with his family. Unfortunately, his loved ones would not have the opportunity to go on vacation with him. On January 11, 2018, Raymond disappeared without a trace. His family still has no idea where he is. When Dean visited his brother's house for the second time on January 13, 2018, he noticed a strange smell as soon as he entered. Even when Raymond was around, he had never supported smoking illegal substances. Suddenly, from the darkness of the room, a strange man emerged and confronted Dean, attempting to chase him away. After realizing Dean had no intention of leaving, the stranger ran out the back door and escaped. Confused by the incident, Dean called 911. A few minutes later, the police arrived at the scene. After conducting a thorough search of Raymond's home, the only evidence they found was a cup filled with ice and soda, complete with a lid and straw. This clue would later become crucial to the investigation. The encounter was so sudden and suspicious that the police quickly began to suspect a connection between the stranger's escape and Raymond's disappearance. Friends described Raymond as a creative and kind person. After overcoming his struggles with alcohol, his positive traits became even more prominent. No one believed he would abandon his family, especially after becoming a grandfather, a moment that brought him immense joy and happiness. Raymond was known for being uncontroversial, even during his struggles with addiction. Following this strange encounter, Dean's anxiety increased. He had never met the man before, and the stranger immediately became the prime suspect in Raymond's mysterious disappearance. However, the police had no clue as to the man's whereabouts. Raymond was officially listed as missing, and a search was launched to find him. Police speculated that he might have relapsed and resumed drinking. However, Raymond was known as one of the most determined members of Alcoholics Anonymous. He attended meetings not to seek support but to inspire others, proving that it was possible to give up alcohol completely and live a full life, even after years of heavy drinking. Police found no trace of alcohol in Raymond's home. They checked his bank card transactions, mobile phone records, and vehicle registration database but found no activity. It was as if he had vanished. None of his acquaintances had seen him during this time. A search of the house was conducted, and volunteers joined the effort, distributing flyers with Raymond's photo and details of his car. Police also sought help from the public through the media, but no information emerged. To gather more details from Dean, the police created a composite sketch of the stranger seen in Raymond's house. Unfortunately, the sketch did not produce any matches in the database. Likewise, fingerprints and DNA collected from the cup and straw did not yield any results, as they were not in the police database. After a week of unsuccessful searching, police finally located a 2016 white Ford F-250 owned by Raymond. The vehicle was found abandoned on January 21 in the North Highlands neighborhood, an area known for its high crime rate. The location was concerning because Raymond had no known connections or business in the area, making it unlikely he would have gone there willingly. The pickup truck's license plate had been removed, but Dean identified the vehicle based on its description during the search. Forensic experts determined that the vehicle had been broken into, with the doors left ajar. These findings led police to believe that something bad had happened to Raymond. After the police impounded the car, they requested assistance from the FBI. FBI agents arrived to inspect the vehicle and used advanced techniques to search for evidence, including fingerprints that might identify a potential suspect. During the inspection, they discovered faint, dark red stains on the car's carpet. Tests confirmed that the substance was human blood. To obtain a sample of Raymond's DNA, the police retrieved a toothbrush from his home. After comparing the collected materials, they determined that the blood in the car belonged to Raymond. Although the discovery was confirmed, no evidence linking the blood to a suspect was found. The investigation continued for 2 weeks, seemingly reaching a dead end. However, an unexpected event occurred that dramatically changed the case. On January 27, 2018, an unidentified vehicle sped through Sacramento at an extremely high speed. Police pursued the car but struggled to keep up as the driver reached speeds of 200 kilometers per hour, violating multiple traffic laws and endangering lives. The chase ended abruptly when the driver crashed head-on into an oncoming vehicle at high speed. Fortunately, the other driver survived, though he was pinned by the metal inside his car. He suffered only a broken leg and minor injuries. At the time, the officers had no idea how dangerous the man they had arrested truly was. The California Highway Patrol apprehended the reckless driver, who was intoxicated at the time of the incident. The man was identified as Victor Merle Gray, an individual with a troubled legal history. He was already wanted for a misdemeanor, and now a DUI charge was added to his record. His actions had clearly endangered lives, making him a significant threat. Victor was taken to the hospital for treatment under police guard and was later transferred to the Sacramento County Jail. As police delved deeper into Victor's background, they grew increasingly suspicious. It was discovered that the car he had been driving was stolen, and the license plate did not match the vehicle's registration. A database check of the license plate revealed it belonged to a 2016 Ford, the same car recently found in a crime-ridden area of the city. That car was registered to a missing person named Raymond. From that point on, Victor became the prime suspect in Raymond's disappearance. More evidence was needed to establish Victor's involvement. Unfortunately, because the police were not immediately focused on pressing Victor for information, progress stalled. He continued to fabricate stories and insisted that he had no knowledge of Raymond or how Raymond's license plate ended up on his car. For 3 months, he refused to confess until a significant breakthrough occurred. In April, DNA analysis of a straw found in a soda cup at Raymond's home matched Victor's DNA, confirming that he had indeed been in Raymond's house. Furthermore, Raymond's younger brother, Dean Wright, also identified Victor. However, this evidence was still insufficient to file formal charges. The mystery of what happened to Raymond remained unsolved. Key evidence was hidden in the car Victor had crashed. On May 8, 2018, police searched the wreckage and discovered important items that shed light on Raymond's disappearance. Amid the clutter inside the car, they found a man's hat. Dean recognized the hat and confirmed it was identical to the one Raymond had worn. Raymond's wallet and glasses were also found in the car, along with a broken cell phone that appeared to have been intentionally destroyed. However, the serial number confirmed that the phone belonged to Raymond. More important evidence was collected from Victor's cell phone. At the end of the tense chase, the phone had been thrown deep into the car's cabin and was only discovered later. On the phone, there were photos of a location that had been sent to someone named Bob. These photos were taken on January 27, the same day as the police chase. In the messages, Victor expressed grievances and complaints directed at Bob. At the end of the messages, he stated that it was time to pay his debt and that he was expecting his money. A detailed analysis of Victor's phone also uncovered a conversation with a woman named Katie Bernard, who lived in a trailer near Raymond's carpentry shop. Victor had a brief conversation with her, trying to determine whether Raymond was alone in his shop or with someone else. It was clear that Victor knew Raymond. This conversation took place in the early morning of January 11, 2018. Geolocation data showed that Victor was only a few dozen meters away from Raymond's workshop at the time. Based on the messages, it appears that he was observing the workshop from outside. Victor contacted Katie to confirm whether Raymond was in the workshop during working hours. Katie left her house and went to see Raymond, exchanging a few words with him. She then confirmed that he was alone in the carpentry workshop. After returning home, she informed Victor that Raymond was indeed alone in the workshop. It is believed that after Katie provided this information, Victor acted and attacked Raymond just before 10 a.m. Police began to suspect that Katie might be an accomplice in the case. She was brought in for questioning in October 2018. The police immediately pressured her, as her correspondence with Victor was clear evidence of her involvement. Under pressure, Katie quickly confessed. Katie admitted that she had informed Victor that Raymond was in the workshop, but she was initially reluctant to assist in the investigation. Despite her reluctance, she became a key witness in solving the mystery of Raymond's disappearance. When asked about Bob, who was mentioned in Victor's messages, Katie revealed that he was Robert Manor, her ex-boyfriend, who was also in a relationship with Raymond. However, their relationship was far from friendly. In 2011, Raymond had been driving drunk and caused a car accident with an oncoming vehicle carrying Robert and his wife. The accident left Robert with a broken leg, requiring serious surgery. Even after treatment, Robert continued to limp and suffered from constant pain. Additionally, Robert was unhappy with the compensation he received for the accident. After the trial, Raymond was ordered to pay $275,000 in damages, but he was unable to pay the full amount at once. Raymond made monthly payments, often late, and never remitted large sums. The situation became more complicated when police ran a background check on Robert in their database. He had an extensive criminal record at the time of the incident. His primary activity was drug trafficking, which had landed him in prison on multiple occasions. Robert also had convictions for armed assault and robbery. He was clearly frustrated with Raymond's behavior and had long plotted revenge against him, whom he blamed for all the problems in his life. The constant pain he experienced served as a reminder of the accident, and his hatred and anger only grew over time. This eventually led to a carefully planned act of revenge. Katie explains that after becoming an informant for Victor, she discovered that the situation involved more than just a stolen car. She claims that she was unwittingly involved in Raymond's kidnapping and, out of fear of becoming the next target, chose to remain silent. Katie hesitantly reveals that Victor confided in her about what happened at the carpentry shop. After exchanging text messages with her, Victor armed himself and went to the shop. There, he struck Raymond on the head, knocking him unconscious. Victor then tied Raymond's hands and stuffed him into a pickup truck. He calmly drove through town to his house, located a few miles away. When Katie asked if he had killed Raymond, Victor grabbed her by the neck and warned her never to reveal their conversation. He threatened her but never disclosed what happened to Raymond. During the investigation, it was discovered that Katie was Robert's girlfriend. She was terrified of him, which made it difficult for the police to get her to talk. She knew he was dangerous and feared retaliation. Eventually, she admitted that she knew what had happened. However, Robert avoided providing details, saying only that he had taken care of everything he needed to do a long time ago. The police's main challenge was locating Raymond. Despite their best efforts, he was never found. In March 2021, Victor and Robert were charged with kidnapping and murder. However, both Victor and Robert denied any involvement in Raymond's case. They knew that admitting guilt would result in a life sentence without parole. Their lawyers argued that, since Raymond's body was never found and the case was based on circumstantial evidence, Victor and Robert could not be convicted of murder. The absence of a body allowed Victor and Robert to avoid punishment. From the start, the prosecutor's office faced several challenges, one of which was the credibility of the witnesses. Most of them had histories of drug use or legal trouble, which made their testimony questionable. Victor later admitted to kidnapping Raymond and handing him over to Robert but denied committing the murder. He revealed that his actions were motivated by a lack of payment. Victor claimed that Robert owed him $10,000 in cash for the job, but the money was never paid. The day Victor was being chased by the police for reckless driving, he drove a car full of evidence to confront Robert for cheating on him. Had Victor been paid, the confrontation might never have happened, and the criminals might have evaded justice. The trial began in March 2023, more than 5 years after Raymond went missing. Despite years of investigation, Raymond's body was never found. This made the trial particularly challenging, as proving guilt without a body was difficult for the prosecution. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys employed several strategies to influence the case. However, the prosecution had a key advantage: Katie Bernard, who agreed to testify against Robert and Victor in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Katie was not charged but played a key role in the case by providing a significant amount of incriminating evidence against Victor and Robert. Victor's confession was also crucial, as it revealed Robert's direct involvement in Raymond's disappearance and possible murder. Defense attorneys highlighted the lack of physical evidence, particularly the absence of a body. The trial lasted 1 day, and the jury deliberated for 4 hours before delivering its verdict on March 17, 2023. Both Victor Merle Gray and Robert Manor were convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Victor refused to address the press, Robert immediately denounced the verdict as a miscarriage of justice. To this day, Robert maintains his innocence, accusing Victor and Katie of conspiring to frame him. However, prosecutors dismissed this claim as false, arguing that only Robert had a motive for revenge. Victor had never met Raymond and thus had no reason to harm him. Raymond Wright's body has never been found, leaving his grieving family unable to give him a proper burial. Despite the tragedy, Raymond's daughters have shown resilience. Though deeply affected by the loss of their father, they have worked hard to rebuild their lives. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Pauline Zeil. On February 22, 1995, Pauline Zeil heard the verdict of the court for the crime she had committed. She was lucky to avoid the death penalty. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tears streamed down her face as she held the hand of her lawyer, seeking comfort despite her unfortunate outcome. She had avoided being placed in a cell with 5 other inmates on death row. Pauline Zeil was a devoted mother, working 2 jobs to support her children. From her first marriage, she had a daughter named Christina. With her second husband, John Zeil, she had 2 sons. Christina lived with her father's relatives in Maryland for a time and did not live with her mother. Many who knew Pauline considered her a good mother. Although she was abandoned by her mother and grew up in an orphanage, no one suspected that she could become a danger to society, especially to her own family. Christina lived with her grandmother, and they had a good relationship. However, just before a series of unfortunate events, her grandmother gave Christina to her mother in Florida. Because they had been separated for so long, Christina was not happy about this reunion. In June 1994, she lived in her mother's small 2-room apartment in Riviera Beach with her 2 younger brothers and John Zeil, her stepfather. John was indifferent to Christina, creating a tense family atmosphere. For months later, Christina's mother, Pauline, reported to the police that her daughter had been kidnapped. While in a crowded store, 7-year-old Christina went into the women's restroom and did not return. Pauline searched everywhere but could not find her. The police took her report seriously and began searching for Christina. During a television appearance, Pauline became emotional, begging for her daughter's safe return, but no one suspected that her feelings might not be sincere. As the police investigated, Pauline's family, friends, and acquaintances revealed that the couple often argued. The tension in the family was not only due to Christina's presence but also to Pauline's marriage to her second husband, John. They argued daily, and he was very controlling. He did not hesitate to resort to violence if things went wrong. Neighbors often heard their arguments, and he was also known to have abused Christina. The police speculated that Christina may have run away, feeling resentment toward her mother and stepfather, and sought comfort from her grandmother, where she had a happier childhood. They began to follow up on this line of investigation. The grandmother stated that she had not seen Christina since she returned her to her mother, although she missed her very much. Interviews with witnesses at a nearby store yielded no useful information. No one had seen a girl matching Christina's description that day, and there were no security cameras in the area. Despite a thorough search of the store, they found no trace of Christina. Then the police discovered a crucial clue: Pauline had sold her bicycle and a videotape. When asked about these items at Christina's school, her mother dismissed them, saying they were no longer needed. At the time, everyone was still hopeful that Christina was alive, but this new information was very disturbing. The police began to question whether Christina had actually been in the store that day and considered the possibility that Pauline's story was a lie intended to mislead the investigation. 2 weeks after Christina's disappearance, the police obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched the home where Christina lived with her mother. Unfortunately, these searches did not yield any useful information. They could not find any clues at the time. Pauline, the girl's mother and the last person to see her alive, became the prime suspect. However, the situation changed dramatically a few days later when Pauline went to the police in tears and confessed. She claimed that her husband, John, had beaten their daughter to death, but insisted it was an accident. Pauline provided a detailed account of Christina's final moments. A victim of domestic violence, she admitted to fabricating the kidnapping story to mislead the police. Her efforts to cover up the crime ultimately contributed to her long prison sentence. John Zile lived with his wife, Pauline, and their sons in a cramped apartment. They struggled financially, and the difficult living conditions may have contributed to negative feelings towards their daughter, Christina. On September 16, 1994, John lost control and beat Christina because she was dirty and had problems with urinary incontinence. Neighbors heard noises, including John's screams and Christina's cries, which sounded different from the typical cries of a child. They could hear muffled thumping, followed by Christina screaming louder. Eventually, the noise died down, but the mother begged John to stop. During the incident, Christina lost consciousness and began to convulse. John hit her hard enough to silence her and covered her mouth with his hand, causing her to choke. When things finally quieted down, neighbors could hear John's panicked voice. John and Pauline hid Christina's body in a closet for a week before moving it to a vacant lot behind a shopping center to bury it. Pauline agreed to reveal Christina's burial location. On October 27, Christina's body was found. She had multiple stab wounds. Forensic experts confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation. The child had suffocated while trying to cover her face with her hands. Police discovered that while the body was in the closet, the couple had prepared for the burial by purchasing items such as shovels, tarps, cleaning supplies, and other necessary tools. Pauline had acted cautiously. She took Christina's belongings, such as her bicycle and videotapes, to a pawn shop. She later admitted that she had done so to erase the memory of her daughter. However, the reality was simpler. She had used the money from the pawn to pay for the burial and clean the house. Pauline blamed her husband for their daughter's death, claiming that he was responsible for killing her. But later revelations changed the story. John claimed that Pauline never intervened when he was beating Christina. On the day he lost control and attacked Christina, he asked Pauline to call for help to save the girl while she was still alive, but Pauline refused to help their daughter. During questioning, Pauline admitted this. She believed that the girl could still be saved, but she was too afraid of facing the consequences of her actions to take her to the hospital. The police discovered that Christina had been abused many times before. Despite this, Pauline never intervened to stop the abuse. Even when Christina begged Pauline for help during John's attack, Pauline showed no interest. Pauline Zile and John Zile were later arrested and charged with child abuse and concealing evidence. Pauline, who has 2 sons, faced losing her parental rights. Realizing this during the first hearing, she voluntarily relinquished her rights to her sons through their attorney. A foster family took in the children. Pauline Zile's trial began, during which she denied her guilt and blamed John for what had happened. Her lawyer argued that Christina's death was accidental, but the prosecution countered effectively, highlighting clear evidence of violence. The defense claimed there were many mitigating circumstances, stating that Pauline was a loving mother and that her colleagues respected her. The lawyers attempted to argue that Pauline was controlled by John, an abusive husband who kept her in a constant state of fear, which prevented her from fighting back. However, the prosecution pointed out that Pauline herself admitted she could have saved her daughter but chose not to. Relatives from Christina's biological father's side, including her grandmother, who had cared for Christina for many years, claimed that from the moment Christina was born, her mother had considered her unwanted and did not want to care for her. They expressed remorse for returning Christina to her mother, Pauline. The prosecution argued that John played a key role in Christina's murder. They claimed that Pauline's actions were completely contrary to her maternal instincts, as she failed to protect her child and did not call for help. Pauline's lawyers disputed this view. However, there was no doubt that both parents were responsible for her death. After an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. They agreed with the prosecution and found Pauline Zeil guilty of first-degree murder because she was with John when he harmed her and actively participated in covering up the crime, including burying the child in a vacant lot. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 13 years for concealing evidence and child abuse, rendering her ineligible for parole. When Pauline's sentence was announced, she cried tears of joy, relieved to avoid the death penalty in the electric chair. Although her lawyers planned to appeal the verdict, claiming it was unjust, their efforts were rejected. The prosecutor stated that the verdict should serve as a warning to abusive parents, emphasizing that such individuals would face serious legal consequences. The case provoked a strong emotional response from the public. As a result, the jury had to be changed to ensure their decision was fair. Many were shocked that Pauline did not intervene to save her daughter, did not call for help, and actively participated in the cover-up of the horrific crime. The public reaction led to a wave of protests. Experts noted that many children are often victims of violence at the hands of their own parents. This situation has been exacerbated by a series of similar crimes in recent years. In California, a woman killed her 3 children, the youngest being 4 years old and the others being 8 and 9. She attempted to blame her husband, who lived far away from the children. The husband fought for custody of the children but had a solid alibi, as he was hundreds of miles away when the tragic events occurred. In 1998, the woman was sentenced to death and is still awaiting execution. There have been many similar cases reported in the media, most notably the 1983 case of Elizabeth Diane Downs. Elizabeth claimed that a stranger shot her 3 children after she picked him up on a deserted road. However, it was revealed that she had shot them herself. Her 7-year-old daughter died as a result, and her 2 other children were left disabled. Elizabeth is currently serving a life sentence for first-degree murder and attempted murder, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, but she has been denied parole several times. A common theme in these cases is that mothers often try to blame their husbands for their actions. Police have become increasingly skeptical of these attempts at blame. This skepticism is evident in Pauline's statements, as police note that her case is not an isolated one. There are many cases of postpartum depression and similar issues affecting mothers. A psychiatrist points out that many tragic child deaths could have been prevented if mothers had received proper support. However, in Pauline's case, there was no indication of any mental health issues, which is why she is facing serious charges. Everyone involved in the case knew the details and believed that Pauline could have prevented her daughter's death. Not only did she fail to stop her husband, but she also missed the opportunity to seek help. When she called for assistance, she could have received guidance that might have saved Christina. However, Pauline deliberately chose not to pursue this option. It was also revealed that Pauline had worked as a nurse. She had a medical degree and was educated and trained in emergency care. Despite this, she made no attempt to help her daughter. John Zile's trial then began. The prosecutor aimed for the harshest punishment, seeking the death penalty by electric chair. John admitted to beating Christina but denied any responsibility for her death. He claimed it was an accident and that he had no intention of killing her. He had simply misjudged his own strength. His first trial ended in a mistrial due to the jury's inability to reach a unanimous decision. His second trial took place in another city in November 1996, where he was convicted of first-degree murder, concealing evidence, and aggravated child abuse. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years for child abuse and concealing evidence. John listened to the verdict with an impassive expression. The judge ruled that the case was not serious enough to warrant the death penalty, so he overturned that aspect of the sentence. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Maribel Ramos. California is one of the most prominent states in the United States, known for its warm climate, beautiful beaches, and world-class entertainment industry. Many come to California with hopes of building a better life. However, not everyone achieves their dreams. For some, California can be a land of promise, but for others, it presents harsh challenges. Maribel Ramos had a long-term goal of entering law enforcement. However, she needed to obtain a higher education, and to afford that, she joined the military. Maribel served 2 combat tours in Iraq and planned to graduate from California State University, Fullerton, with a degree in criminal justice. A veteran of the U.S. Army, she had served for 8 years and was looking forward to returning to civilian life. Maribel knew her goals and was determined to achieve them. After her military service, she shifted her focus to new opportunities, including her desire to enroll at a university in California. Orange, California, where she lived until her mother's passing in 2009. Then, Maribel reached out to her sister, Lucy, asking if she could move in with her. Lucy declined, explaining that she and her daughter were settled in a different location, but she would consider moving in with Maribel if she was unable to find a roommate. To find a roommate, Maribel placed an advertisement and soon received several responses. One inquiry stood out, a man named Kwang Choi Joy, who described himself as seeking a place to stay while job hunting. After meeting Kwang, both Maribel and Lucy found him to be calm and educated. He mentioned to the sisters that he had never been married and had no children. After Kwang moved in with Maribel, it quickly became evident that he was quite isolated. He spent a lot of time alone at home and rarely ventured outside. To help him connect, Maribel started inviting Kwang to family gatherings, dinners, games, and parties, where he met many of her relatives. Over time, Maribel began to change her routine and started participating in a weekly softball game, which was unusual for her. On May 2013, she disappeared when she failed to show up for a scheduled event. Maribel's family and friends made several attempts to reach her, but none were successful. They checked her apartment but found no sign of her. Concerned, they reported her missing, prompting the authorities to launch an investigation. Police officers visited Maribel's apartment but received no response after knocking on the door. Everything outside seemed normal, with no signs of trouble. There were no broken windows or indications of a break-in. As a result, the officers decided to enter the apartment to search for Maribel. There were no indications of a crime at Maribel's home. A search revealed that she was not packing for a trip, All her clothes were neatly in place, except for her mobile phone, wallet, and identification. Since Maribel's car was parked outside, investigators had their suspicions. Maribel was not the kind of person to vanish without a trace, which raised concerns that she might be in danger. When investigators arrived, Kwang Choi-joy unexpectedly approached them. He mentioned that he had last seen Maribel the previous night around 10 p.m. when he returned from a walk. In the video from the surveillance camera that evening at 8:15 p.m., Maribel had received a check for her apartment, which was the last time she was seen in public. She calmly accepted the envelope and left, showing no signs of fear or urgency. At that time, Maribel's family turned to social media for assistance. They shared a photo of Maribel online, asking anyone with information about her to reach out. They aimed to engage as many people as possible in the search. Meanwhile, investigators attempted to track Maribel's mobile phone, but it had been turned off. During their investigation, the police learned that Maribel had recently started dating a man named Paul Lopez. He was the last person to speak with her on the phone the day before she went missing. As a result, the police asked Paul to come to the station for questioning. Paul appeared confident and explained that he and Maribel were still in the early stages of their relationship. He also mentioned that he was dating other women. When asked if Maribel was seeing anyone else, Paul said he had not inquired about that. He confirmed that he spoke with Maribel on Thursday evening and noted that he was working a shift from 4 p.m. until midnight that day, so they did not meet in person. Investigators observed that while he was cooperative, there was no assurance that he was being truthful. However, Paul's truck had a GPS tracker, allowing officers to monitor his movements that night. The data revealed that Paul was not near Maribel's home. Paul mentioned Maribel's roommate Kwang, noting that their relationship had recently deteriorated. He recounted that Maribel often complained about Kwang's inability to pay rent on time. During a conversation, Paul overheard Maribel tell Kwang that she wanted him to move out the next day. In a speakerphone call, Paul warned Kwang that he would be kicked out if he didn't leave as instructed. Paul offered to help Maribel and said he would come over if she needed assistance, but she declined, stating it wasn't necessary. This was their final conversation. After the conflict between Maribel and Kwang became known, investigators learned that Kwang, who was 54 years old, had moved to the United States from South Korea as a teenager. He had no significant criminal record, and there was nothing indicating any illegal activities in his past. However, further investigation uncovered a history of anger issues. Kwang's sister had once filed a complaint against him due to his volatile temper. While examining his social media, investigators noted that Kwang and Maribel Ramos appeared to share a close bond. Nevertheless, when they spoke with Maribel's family, they learned that her relationship with Kwang was not as ideal as it seemed in their social media photos. It appeared that although they shared a friendly relationship, Kwang desired something deeper. In the summer of 2012, Lucy received a call from Kwang, who admitted that he was in love with Maribel and was trying to find her because of this. Lucy later informed Maribel about the conversation and urged her to promptly reject Kwang's feelings before things escalated. Maribel then spoke with Kwang, making it clear that she did not have romantic feelings for him. At first, Kwang seemed to handle the rejection well. However, as time passed, he began taking extreme actions to win Maribel over. He changed his wardrobe, got a tattoo, and spent over $10,000 on plastic surgery to appear younger. Police discovered alarming evidence, a frantic phone call from Maribel to them just 12 days before she went missing. In the call, Maribel expressed that she felt unsafe around her roommate. To understand the relationship between Maribel and Kwang, investigators brought him in for questioning. He appeared calm and friendly, expressing concern over her disappearance. Kwang claimed they had been roommates for about a year and a half, sharing enjoyable experiences like cruises, dancing, and parties. However, investigators suspected that the reality was not as ideal as Kwang portrayed it, and pressed him to explain Maribel's 911 call. Kwang mentioned that he and Maribel went to karaoke that night and ended up arguing. He noted that Maribel's behavior when drinking alcohol could be either very friendly or aggressive. When detectives asked about the argument, Kwang mentioned that it occurred on Thursday evening and was about the rent. He believed the detectives should investigate further, since he last saw Maribel at 9 p.m. when he took a drive to cool off after their disagreement. When he returned, she was missing, and he thought someone might have taken her away, because her car was still in its place. Although Kwang's account seemed believable, some aspects of his appearance raised suspicions. He claimed he had scratched himself on bushes while walking in the park, which seemed odd. At this stage of the investigation, there was no evidence that Kwang was involved in Maribel's disappearance. As days passed, the search for Maribel became increasingly difficult, and the likelihood of finding her alive decreased. To uncover new evidence, detectives decided to involve forensic experts to thoroughly examine Maribel's home, hoping they would find clues that were previously overlooked. During this time, Kwang cooperated with the police, allowing them to search his rented car without a warrant, including a detailed inspection by a police dog trained to detect human remains. However, the dog did not find any traces in the house or the vehicles. Meanwhile, a few days after Maribel's disappearance, Kwang expressed his feelings of missing his friend on forums dedicated to the case. Despite his attempts to portray himself as a grieving roommate, Kwang began to distance himself from Maribel's family, whom he had previously considered friends. He also declined to participate in most vigils and searches for her. This behavior raised red flags for investigators, who hoped he would slip up and reveal information about Maribel. Kwang visited a public library to use the internet since he had given his phone and laptop to the police. Detectives requested surveillance footage, which showed nothing unusual. He used the laptop for about 2 hours before returning it. They were eager to check the browser history on the laptop, but it had been cleared to protect users' privacy after it was returned, adding to the police's frustrations as they continued their efforts to find Maribel. Maribel's family were devastated when Maribel went missing, and no one knew where she had gone or what had happened to her. In their desperation, her family put up flyers throughout the city, hoping someone might have seen her or have information about her whereabouts. However, this effort was not enough. Realizing they needed to reach a wider audience, they created a social media account to share Maribel's situation and ask for help from anyone who might know something about Maribel. For 2 weeks, the police had no leads on her disappearance. Then, an unexpected development occurred. Maribel's family announced on social media that they would organize a walk and search for her in Modjeska Canyon. At that time, detectives discovered that Kwang had returned the rented car, which raised their suspicions. They decided to search the car again. During the first search, the police dog did not detect any scent, but this time it quickly reacted to a smell coming from the trunk. While this evidence was not enough to make an arrest, it indicated to the detectives that they were on the right track. When Kwang went to the library to use the laptop again, he saw on Facebook that Maribel's family was organizing a walk-and-search event in Modjeska Canyon. Unbeknownst to him, the police had obtained a warrant that allowed them to remotely access the laptop he was using. Detectives were able to see his search history, which included queries about how long it takes for a human body to decompose. He also looked up the location in the canyon where Maribel's family planned to gather for the search. After searching on Google Maps, he zoomed in and out of the area, which was 10 miles away from Modjeska Canyon. The officers following his actions were shocked. It became clear that Kwang had inadvertently revealed to them the location where he had hidden Maribel's body. Investigators quickly arrived at a remote area with no nearby houses. After searching for 30 minutes, they discovered a shallow grave. While they suspected the remains belonged to Maribel, they needed forensic confirmation before arresting Kwang. Forensic experts confirmed the victim's identity using dental records. The remains were indeed those of Maribel Ramos. Due to various animals in the environment, Determining the exact cause of death was not possible. When Kwang noticed the approaching officers, he attempted to escape by jumping out of a window, but was apprehended and taken to the police station. He continued to deny any involvement in Maribel's disappearance, unaware that the police had already identified her remains. Kwang was charged with multiple offenses. Maribel's family continued to cherish her memory, yet it became clear that the circumstances surrounding her death were too uncertain to reach a conclusion. Authorities could only speculate on how she might have died at Kwang's hands. Prosecutors claimed that Kwang was in love with Maribel, while she did not reciprocate his feelings. Given Maribel's combat training, which could have allowed her to easily overpower Kwang in a fair fight, it was assumed he must have set up an attack. Investigators believed he entered her room during the night and suffocated her while she slept. He then reportedly placed her body in the trunk of his rented car and drove to a secluded spot where he had to crawl under a taut wire. Although there was a possibility that he moved Maribel's body multiple times, there was no evidence to support that theory. Additionally, very little forensic evidence connected Kwang to the crime. In court, Kwang did not plead guilty. He expressed that he would not apologize for something he insisted he did not do. He stated that he had never searched for the grave's location in the canyon and suggested that someone was framing him. He claimed he had nothing to contribute and maintained that he was not involved in Maribel's death. Kwang proposed that Maribel might have died from an illness after years of struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder and feelings of paranoia. The prosecutors acknowledged that the case was largely circumstantial, highlighting that key evidence included a library search that focused on the specific area where Maribel's body was discovered. He was held in the Orange County Jail on a $1 million bail. In July 2014, the court found Kwang Choi-joy guilty of murdering Maribel Ramos. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He continues to maintain his innocence. Delphine Jubilar. Born in 1987 in Gaillac, she worked nights as a nurse, juggling that demanding schedule with raising 2 children. The family lived in Cagnac-les Mines, where life seemed routine and predictable. On the surface, everything appeared stable and ordinary. Early in the morning on December 16, 2020, a little after 4:00 a.m., Cédric Jubilar called the emergency services to report that his wife, Delphine, had been missing for several hours. He said he had last seen her late the previous evening. He was unable to give an exact time, instead mentioning a vague window between around 11:00 p.m. and the early hours of the morning, according to Cédric. Before contacting the authorities, he tried to reach Delphine on his own. He messaged one of Delphine's close friends, assuming she might have gone to stay with her friend. In that message, he asked the friend to tell Delphine to come home. The response came quickly. Delphine was not there. Cédric couldn't get in touch with her, but he waited until after sunrise to contact the police. He explained that he hoped she would come back by herself overnight. However, phone records later revealed that Cédric had been awake, moving around the house, and repeatedly turning the Wi-Fi on and off between 4:00 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Behavior investigators viewed as highly suspicious. The police were there immediately. A thorough sweep of the house and backyard revealed no signs that Delphine had left during the night. Her car remained in the garage. Her belongings were untouched, and both children were asleep in their beds. Officers observed nothing to suggest she had planned to go anywhere, especially not in the middle of the night. These early findings immediately cast doubt on Cédric's version of events, marking the true beginning of the investigation. 2 neighbors testified they heard a terrifying scream coming from the Jubilar home shortly after 11:00 p.m. Louis, the couple's 6-year-old son, reported hearing his parents argue loudly last night. He also said to investigators, his father screamed, his mother fell. A statement that became one of the most important early clues. When police entered the home, there were no signs of an attack. Everything appeared normal. No disturbance. However, in a disturbing detail, investigators discovered that the couple's blanket was found in the drum of the washing machine. Despite it being summer, inside the machine, detectives also found fragments of Cedric's broken glasses, raising even more suspicions about a violent incident occurring before the wash cycle was started. Authorities then deployed K-9 teams, thermal cameras, drones, and ground units to comb through the surrounding areas of Cagnac-les Mines. Locals rallied quickly as well, forming volunteer search parties. Within days, nearly 1,000 people were scouring the rugged landscape. Steep ravines, dense underbrush, and narrow trails that required caution, precision. In one of the most difficult-to-access locations, investigators found several of her personal items: her phone, pieces of clothing, and a knife. The area was completely unlit, and the scattered arrangement of the objects suggested they had been thrown or placed there, not accidentally dropped during a walk. Even more puzzling, there were no physical traces showing she had made her way there independently. Officers noted that even with a strong flashlight, the nighttime route would have been incredibly difficult. Forensic experts later concluded the items had likely been staged to simulate a voluntary disappearance or nighttime walk. A theory that strengthened suspicions of deliberate manipulation. Forensic analysis of her phone added another disturbing detail. The device's last recorded signal came on the morning of December 16th, just over a mile from her home. Moments later, it abruptly shut down, not from a drained battery, but from what appeared to be a sudden, intentional interruption. This sharp cutoff became a critical clue. In January and February 2021, Delphine's phone exhibited strange behavior. It seemed to automatically activate internal functions, sending short, individual signals. This led investigators to wonder if someone had remotely accessed or physically tampered with the phone. They contacted Samsung for answers. Samsung stated that these signals could occur during extensive diagnostic tests. Automated checks might trigger background signals that phone companies interpret as the phone turning on. Despite this explanation, investigators considered several possibilities: a software error, remote access, or unintended consequences from examining the phone during the investigation. No cause was definitively eliminated. In addition to the technical analysis, detectives investigated Delphine's personal life, focusing on her communication with a man she was dating. They had been making future plans, and she sent him a personal photo the night before she disappeared. However, his alibi was quickly confirmed by independent sources, proving he was home all night. Investigators then looked into his wife, Kate, the day before Delphine went missing. Kate called Delphine's phone several times. While this created tension, investigators found no solid evidence connecting Kate to Delphine's disappearance. It seemed more like a personal dispute than a criminal lead. Meanwhile, Delphine's extramarital affair also made investigators suspect Cedric. Another man briefly drew attention early in the investigation, someone who had previously been involved in a car-related dispute with the Jubilar family. Despite the past tension, his involvement was quickly ruled out. He provided a solid, independently verified alibi, so investigators found no reason to pursue him further. Neighbors also mentioned a van that had been parked near Jubilar home for several days before Delphine's disappearance. Investigators located the owner, conducted interviews, and reviewed his movements. After comparing times, routes, and phone data, no connection to the case was found. Investigators then focused on Delphine's car. Her vehicle was parked differently than usual. The position didn't match her habits. Inside, investigators found fresh condensation on the windows, a sign that someone had recently been inside. One theory was that the car had been used during the night and later returned. As interviews continued, inconsistencies accumulated. The times Cedric mentioned didn't align with digital timestamps. Several aspects of his story shifted between statements. He initially claimed Delphine went out to walk the dog. But the dog was found clean, dry, and asleep, with no signs of having been outdoors on a cold December night. This contradiction became one of the central elements of the case. This pattern, behavioral oddities, shifting details, and tech data not matching the story, gradually pushed Cedric to the center of the investigation. On June 16th, officers arrived at the Jubilar home early in the morning, conducted a full search in the presence of official witnesses, and took Cedric into custody. He was formally named a suspect in Delphine's disappearance and the alleged concealment of her body. Following the arrest, investigators expanded their focus to examine Cedric's personal history. He was orphaned at a young age and placed in various foster homes. According to those who knew him, this upbringing left him with deep insecurities, a strong need for approval, and emotional immaturity beneath a facade of independence. Some described him as diligent, while others said he could be manipulative, evasive, unable to cope with pressure. Within the Jubilar household, there were clear imbalances. Delphine had stable employment, steady income, long-term career prospects. Meanwhile, Cedric's work was inconsistent. He often depended on his wife's financial stability. Investigators also discovered that Cedric had searched online weeks earlier for how to kill someone with a knife without making noise, a chilling detail later presented at trial. After completing crucial forensic examinations, tactical teams resumed active field operations. They searched caves, abandoned tunnels, dense wooded ravines, and steep, hazardous terrain requiring specialized mountaineering support. The regions surrounding Cagnac-les mines were combed once again, this time with advanced thermal imaging drones and technical teams capable of accessing difficult locations. Authorities were determined to leave no possibility unexplored. The extensive searches highlighted the serious nature of Delphine's disappearance. Even in the initial hours, when missing people typically leave clues, investigators found nothing. There was no safe route she could have taken at night, no indication she left willingly, and no sign her body had been moved. This complete lack of evidence was a major red flag for investigators. It suggested that whatever happened to Delphine likely occurred in or very close to her home. A specific location quickly became a focal point: an abandoned, fire-damaged farm. A former cellmate of Cedric Jubilar alleged that he had heard Cedric admit to burying Delphine's body there. Consequently, investigators conducted a thorough search of the farm. They used ground-penetrating radar, digging equipment, and meticulously examined every section of soil. However, the search yielded no results. They found no bones, clothing fibers, or any biological evidence. There was nothing to indicate that the farm had ever been used as a burial site. Meanwhile, DNA testing was difficult because Delphine's body was never found. Without her body, investigators couldn't get a confirmed DNA sample to compare with any evidence they found. This meant DNA tests couldn't give definitive results. Investigators also conducted a meticulous forensic sweep of the Peugeot 207 Delphine drove. They examined the trunk, cabin, floor mats, and all interior compartments. No signs of a struggle, movement of heavy objects, or attempts to clean up biological material were detected. Vehicle data logs showed no nighttime trips and no unusual changes in mileage, reducing the likelihood that her car had played any role in the disappearance. Following Cedric's arrest, his lawyers focused on the lack of direct evidence against him. They filed 7 motions asking for him to be released, arguing that because there was no body or physical evidence after so much time, he should no longer be held in custody. However, the court rejected each motion, stating that there was not enough reason to alter the terms of his imprisonment. His lawyers also argued that the isolation, limited communication, and being treated as the primary suspect for an extended period caused him excessive psychological distress. These points were key to a public campaign that depicted Cedric as being detained without significant proof. Prosecutors, however, firmly opposed Cedric's release. They highlighted contradictions in his statements, the risk that he could influence witnesses, and the possibility that he might hide or destroy information still being evaluated. In complex, bodiless cases like this, judicial decisions hinge not only on hard evidence but also on assessments of potential risks. This reasoning explains why the court repeatedly rejected every request for his release. Legal arguments stretched on for months. Both sides continued strengthening their positions, yet the outcome never changed. Cedric remained in custody while investigators moved forward with the case. In 2023, volunteers launched a new round of searches, focusing on rugged areas previously inaccessible due to steep terrain and dense vegetation. But this effort also ended in disappointment. Not a single clue surfaced. The case finally reached trial in September 2025 at the Cour d'Assises du Tarn in Albi. The prosecution presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence. The scream heard by neighbors at 11:00 p.m. Cedric's inconsistent timelines. The washing machine, running at 4:00 a.m., with a duvet inside. Broken glasses found in the washing machine. His son's testimony. His "How to Kill Quietly" Google searches, and his own recorded prison conversations, in which he appeared to mock the investigation. On October 17, 2025, after 4 weeks of hearings and 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Cedric Jubillar guilty of the murder of his wife Delphine. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, the exact term requested by the prosecution. The court rejected the defense's argument of accidental death during a domestic argument and fully accepted the prosecution's reconstruction. A premeditated act, driven by jealousy and rage after Delphine announced her intention to leave him for another man. Right after the verdict was announced, Cedric Jubillar's lawyers said they would appeal. As of December 2, 2025, the appeal is in progress, and Cedric Jubillar is still in jail. Delphine's body has never been found. Despite the conviction, her family continues to search, refusing to bury an empty coffin. They insist that one day they will bring Delphine home. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Fernando Pastorizzo. A young couple in love found themselves in a toxic relationship that ended in tragedy. The investigation revealed that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, with disturbing secrets emerging. Nahir Galarza was born on September 11, 1998, in Gualeguaychú, Argentina, a city of about 100,000 residents known for its vibrant carnivals and its proximity to Uruguay. From a young age, Nahir was sociable and cheerful. She had a younger brother, who was 3 years her junior. Unlike Nahir, her younger brother faced developmental challenges and struggled with learning, eventually receiving a diagnosis of a disability. Nahir excelled in school and found learning languages easy. Their family was considered exemplary and happy, maintaining a well-organized home life. Their mother emphasized cleanliness, and Nahir developed a strong obsession with order, tidiness, and the habit of washing hands regularly. Her father was a police officer, and while the parents were strict, they indulged their children. Nahir aspired to become a lawyer, and after finishing high school, enrolled in the law program at Concepción del Uruguay University. She was also passionate about sports, play field hockey, engaging in daily training and massages to stay fit, and she enjoyed a vibrant social life filled with friends and parties. In 2012, when she was 14, Nahir met 15-year-old Fernando Gabriel Pastorizzo at a bowling alley. Fernando, born on January 3, 1997, in Gualeguaychú, Argentina, was a cheerful and active young man from a respectable family who loved animals. This caught Nahir's attention, and they began dating. However, their relationship was tumultuous, characterized by frequent arguments and breakups that would be resolved just a few days later. Both were jealous and suspicious, which fueled their conflicts. In 2016, they went on a family trip to Brazil, during which they managed to enjoy their time together with hardly any disputes. It seemed like their relationship was improving, but issues continued to arise, and they still had cycles of arguing, breaking up, and reconciling. On Christmas Eve 2017, both Nahir and Fernando attended a party, but they arrived separately with their friends after having fought earlier. During the party, a brawl broke out between Fernando and another guy. The exact reason for the fight remains unclear, as Nahir, Fernando, and their friends provided conflicting explanations. Fernando claimed he was severely beaten, while Nahir stated that Fernando became jealous of her and started the altercation with the guy. On December 28, 2017, Nahir went for a massage. After her session, she discovered that her phone was dead. Remembering that she had left her charger at Fernando's home, she decided to go there and stayed the night. The next morning, Fernando drove her home on his motorcycle. Unfortunately, at dawn, a taxi driver discovered Fernando bleeding and called the police and an ambulance. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Fernando had died. The police discovered that he had been attacked twice near his motorcycle. News of the incident spread quickly, and at 7 a.m., Nahir, just waking up, learned about it. She posted a picture of them together on her social media, writing, "5 years together, quarrels and breakups, reconciliations, but always with love. I love you forever, my angel." Fernando's mother called Nahir to ask what had happened, but Nahir was unsure. Meanwhile, the police began gathering evidence at the crime scene and launched a murder investigation. Initially, they thought it might be a robbery, but this theory was ruled out since Fernando's money had not been taken. The area was typically calm and safe, with a low crime rate, raising questions about who could have killed Fernando and why. Investigators discovered that Fernando had been attacked with a 9mm pistol, a type of weapon usually used by police. This raised suspicions that a police officer might be involved. It was established that Fernando was first shot from behind at close range, likely by someone who approached him unnoticed. The assailant then moved in closer and shot him in the heart. Could the attacker have been someone he knew? This possibility was reinforced by the discovery of a second helmet at the scene. The police began reviewing surveillance footage from the area and saw a girl leaving the scene at 5:22 a.m., but her face was not visible. Nahir soon became a suspect and was summoned to the police station for questioning. During the interview, she confidently claimed that Fernando had driven her home that night. She stated that she showered, went to bed, and later woke up to the news of the tragedy. She expressed her sorrow for Fernando in a social media post. Nahir appeared very distressed and was crying, leading the investigators to have no further questions for her. The police decided to interrogate Nahir's father, Marcelo Galarza, who is a police officer. He initially claimed he didn't know anyone named Fernando, but this was later proven false when photos from their trip to Brazil surfaced, showing them together. It became clear that Nahir's father was well acquainted with Fernando, leading to questions about why he lied. The police began to suspect that he might be involved in the crime, prompting his denial of knowing Fernando. They developed a theory that pointed to Marcelo's involvement, especially after discovering evidence related to a weapon. Forensic tests confirmed that this weapon belonging to Nahir's father was the weapon used to kill Fernando, making him the main suspect. Investigators considered possible motives, suspecting that he may have disliked Fernando because of his daughter's relationship with Fernando, which might have led to a confrontation that ended fatally. Then came a surprising twist. Nahir confessed to killing Fernando to protect her father, who was on the verge of being arrested. She claimed that Fernando had subjected her to physical violence, alleging that on the night of the incident, he had grabbed her hair and dragged her home, prompting her to attack him. However, questions arose about how she obtained a weapon for this act. It became evident that this was a premeditated action, as she had brought a weapon with her. Nahir had stolen her father's service pistol, which he kept in the fridge, and returned it after the murder, leaving her parents completely unaware. She was recorded on surveillance footage. When the police questioned her about why she fled and attempted to hide evidence, not contacting the police or an ambulance if she was innocent, Nahir explained that she was confused. At that moment, she didn't believe Fernando would die and didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation. Upon realizing that she had killed him, she became very distressed. Her friends and Fernando's friends provided conflicting accounts. Nahir's friends blamed Fernando, citing her frequent complaints about him, while his friends accused Nahir. Some even noted that their relationship was difficult to define, as they spent more time apart than together. Nahir had 5 other boyfriends, and Fernando likely had other girlfriends as well. Their messages were examined, revealing that Fernando appeared to be more of a victim in their relationship. Nahir was aggressive and threatened him, while the kind-hearted Fernando confided in friends about being physically abused when he tried to break up with her. He was exhausted from the relationship and sought a peaceful life without her. This may have motivated Nahir to kill him, driven by a desire for revenge over his wish to end their relationship. Later, Nahir claimed that she accidentally attacked Fernando while she was holding the weapon. She stated that they both fell off the motorcycle, and that was when the gun fired for the first time. After this, she picked up the weapon and accidentally shot him again. This explanation seemed highly unlikely. A ballistic expert stated that it was impossible for there to be 2 accidental shots. Even if the first shot was an accident, the second shot was definitely intentional. Surveillance footage showed her walking home at a normal pace, covering more than 20 blocks, which contradicted her claim of being in shock and confusion after the accidental attacking. A handwriting expert analyzed Nahir's writing and found that she displayed significant emotional instability, along with self-centered and manipulative traits. Her handwriting indicated egocentrism, a craving for attention, mood swings, impulsiveness, aggressiveness, a tendency to lie, and a desire for dominance and manipulation. Her handwriting also revealed that she was experiencing considerable emotional turmoil. Nahir was more complicated than she initially appeared. She had a contradictory, complex, pushy, and aggressive personality. It was discovered that at the age of 16, she had pulled a prank on her parents by faking her own kidnapping, leaving them terrified and shocked when they realized it was a joke. Before the trial, she underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist reported that she exhibited complete narcissism, was quick to anger, aggressive, and showed no remorse for her actions. Besides, she was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which was linked to her desire for control. During the trial, Nahir displayed defiant behavior. She arrived in shorts, looked down on others with arrogance, frequently adjusted her hair, and flirted with those around her. Although she maintained that her actions were in self-defense, nobody found her story credible. Her father initially supported her, but later distanced himself from her. There was no evidence indicating that Nahir had experienced physical abuse from Fernando. The prosecution outlined the following events. Around 2 a.m., Fernando was driving Nahir home. Upon arriving, they entered an apartment and argued for about 2 hours. Fernando wanted to end their relationship, but Nahir disagreed. During this time, she secretly took her father's weapon, and they left for another location. While traveling down a dark, deserted street, Nahir asked Fernando to stop. She got off the motorcycle, attacked him in the back, and when he fell, she attacked him again. Afterward, she returned home. Once there, she took a shower to clean off the blood and gun residue from her hands, returned her father's gun to the fridge, changed her clothes, and went to sleep. On July 3, 2018, Nahir Galarza was found guilty of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 35 years. This means she could be released when she is 54 years old. At 19, Nahir has become the youngest person in Argentina to receive a life sentence. She has filed 3 appeals against her conviction, but all have been denied, leaving the sentence unchanged. At this time, Nahir changed her statement. She claims that she is not guilty at all, and her father is the real killer, as he attacked Fernando. One interesting thing is that there is surveillance footage showing Nahir at home during the time of the murder, raising questions about her alibi. Her mother, Yamina Crow, who divorced Nahir's father, supports her daughter and believes in her innocence. Nahir has stated that she was afraid of her father and her uncle, who abused her, which led her to take the blame for the crime. She expresses concern for her mother and brother's safety. Nahir has also filed a lawsuit against her uncle. The case has attracted significant public attention, with mixed reactions from the community. Some people are indifferent, while others support Nahir and believe she is innocent. Conversely, some argue that she not only killed Fernando, but also ruined her own life. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Susan Bailey. Susan was born in 1965 in a small town in Minnesota, USA. She was an ordinary, carefree girl who easily made friends and was sociable. Partly due to having many siblings, her parents had 4 children in total. Susan was smart, did well in school, and was responsible and non-confrontational. From a young age, her parents taught her the importance of independence and hard work. After graduating from high school, Susan enrolled in a local college. To avoid burdening her parents financially while paying for her education, she took a job as a saleswoman. It seemed like everything was falling into place for her. However, she never enjoyed the cold and gray weather of Minnesota and dreamed of moving south. After completing her studies, she decided to relocate to another state. This decision led Susan to the sunny beaches of California, fulfilling her childhood dream. There, she quickly found a job in retail and met a man, Mr. Bailey, who would become her husband. He was calm and reserved, pursuing a military career. They married in 1988. Although Susan's family disapproved of her choice due to the challenges of Mr. Bailey's profession, they ultimately accepted her decision. In the following years, they moved several times because of her husband's military service. While he worked, Susan spent most of her time at home and felt unhappy with this lifestyle. However, he promised to leave the military after his contract ended, which he did in 1990. They then returned to California, and Susan decided to become pregnant with their first child, a girl named Jennifer. 4 years later, they welcomed another child. They chose to focus on their careers to support their growing family. During this time, Susan found success in her retail career and became the primary breadwinner, while her husband struggled in his job. They switched roles, with him taking on the role of a stay-at-home dad, and Susan working to provide for the family. This change was made possible when Susan accepted a job with a new clothing company. In 1997, she was promoted to regional manager of Texas, which came with significant responsibilities. Susan realized she couldn't turn down this opportunity. She and the children relocated to Texas, where they decided to settle in a small town called Denton. In 2000, the Bailey family purchased a house with 4 bedrooms, a living room, and a separate playroom in the small town. It seemed like a perfect place for a peaceful family life. As Susan became part of the local community, she met her neighbors. They had children of school age and lived across the street. They spent a lot of time together, discussing local news. However, Susan later discovered something troubling. Whenever Jennifer visited the neighbor, she would leave with items in her hands. After these visits, the neighboring family noticed that money and belongings were missing, leading them to suspect that Jennifer was stealing. Despite this, her neighbor never brought up her concerns with Susan, possibly thinking that Susan was too busy with work and did not want to burden her with additional problems. As a result, the relationship with the neighbors became strained. Susan's son David faced several challenges. He struggled with bedwetting, which required her to change the bedding nearly every day, causing her stress. Additionally, David had behavioral issues and frequently got into trouble. However, these problems were minor compared to the bankruptcy of Susan's company, which led to her losing her job and significant income, severely impacting their family. At that time, she had started her own small cosmetic shop, but it did not compensate for the loss of her managerial position in a large firm. Eventually, she found work at another clothing store, but her new salary was much lower than her previous earnings. During this period, Susan realized her independence, while her husband struggled to find a job to support her. Their relationship became strained, and by 2006, they officially divorced. It remains unclear why her husband did not take any initiative to fight for custody of their children or their assets. He simply left everything to Susan without hesitation and agreed to pay child support. Susan was struggling with her own problems as well as those of her son and daughter, and everything seemed to be getting worse. For the first time, she felt overwhelmed by her new responsibilities. At the same time, she had to work 2 jobs to keep the family financially stable and avoid debt. This left her with little time to spend with her children. Susan was hardly ever home, and the children felt neglected. David was falling behind in school, skipping classes, and even resorting to self-harm in an attempt to get his mother's attention. His sister Jennifer took care of him, but she felt uncomfortable in that role and wanted to enjoy her own life instead. She often expressed her frustration about this. During this time, Jennifer met a boy named Paul Henson, who was a year younger than her. He lived with his family in a trailer park. Paul mentioned that he came from a troubled family, which resonated with Jennifer as she could relate to his struggles. However, Paul was quite unusual. He believed he had 2 distinct personalities. He described one of his 2 personalities as a reincarnation of a 10th century executioner, referring to it as his evil alter ego. Many of his classmates noticed Paul talking to himself, conversing with imaginary people and speaking in languages no one understood. He spent most of his free time playing fantasy computer games. Despite his unusual behavior, Paul genuinely liked Jennifer, and they started dating. Jennifer thought his eccentricities were just a product of his vivid imagination and gradually began to share his interests, playing the same games and acting oddly. For instance, they wore dog collars with each other's names. They also engaged in dark mystical practices, which eventually led to a love triangle. Paul revealed to Jennifer that one of his personalities was fond of her, while another personality of his had feelings for a girl named Marilee. Marilee was a 14-year-old from a wealthy family who appeared naive and impressionable. Marilee and Jennifer both fell under his influence, believing they all had mutual feelings for each other, leading to a complicated emotional situation. Susan Bailey strongly disliked Paul from the start and encouraged her daughter to end her relationship with the unusual Paul. However, Jennifer refused to heed her family's warnings. As a result, both their relationship and the home environment worsened quickly. Despite being told not to communicate with Paul, Jennifer was seen with him during the day when all the adults were home. Additionally, Jennifer regularly ignored her mother's requests regarding her schoolwork, chores, and taking care of David. Jennifer got a job at a fast food restaurant, which meant she was hardly ever home. This worried Susan, as David was often left unsupervised. To help, Susan's parents agreed to take David in for the month of July. During this time, they noticed an improvement in his behavior. They taught him household chores and introduced him to activities like fishing. However, they also observed some concerning behavior when David threw a tantrum in the car after his grandparents refused to buy him something on a whim. He rocked the car back and forth in frustration but calmed down as soon as they got home. This incident made his grandmother realize that David was struggling with emotional issues. Determined to help David, his grandparents began taking him to various doctors and clinics. His grandmother wanted him to stay longer so they could address his problems, but Susan was reluctant to let him stay for too long. Eventually, she bought a ticket and insisted that David return home. When he did, he surprised his mother and sister with his good behavior, and even brought Jennifer a small gift. At this point, Susan had been considering buying a car for Jennifer to make her commute to work easier, but Susan realized she didn't have enough money. Jennifer was unhappy about this and insisted she needed a car for convenience. Her mother asked her to be patient. A month later, Susan was shocked to receive a bill for the children's phone services that totaled $1,500. She found out that Jennifer had been spending all her free time talking to Paul, while David was frequently online, which led to high charges. Susan explained to her children that this was unacceptable and urged them to reduce their phone usage. Shortly after, Susan received a notification that Jennifer had spent an additional $200 on phone calls. Furious and already facing financial difficulties, Susan confronted Jennifer, who claimed that her paycheck had been delayed and that she intended to cover the costs herself. At that point, Susan decided to contact the restaurant where Jennifer worked to inquire about the delay in her daughter's pay. For the past month and a half, Jennifer had not shown up for work, so there was no paycheck for her. This shocked Susan, who realized that Jennifer had been dishonest. Instead of working, she had been spending time with her boyfriend. The next day, Susan at work, leaving David home alone, wandering around the courtyard of the house without clothes, which scared the neighbors. At that moment, Susan understood that she had lost control over her children and felt powerless to change things. To support the family, she had to work all the time. By the end of September, the situation had worsened. Jennifer decided to take advantage of her mother's constant work schedule. She started inviting Paul and Marilee over to the guest room, where her father used to live, spending time with them while Susan was away. When Susan was home, they acted like good guests, but as soon as she left, they behaved rudely. David was aware of everything but kept it a secret from Susan, supporting his sister and her friends. Eventually, they all grew tired of their parents' restrictions on their lives. This frustration led to a dangerous plan to kill Jennifer's mothers and Marilee's mothers, as well as Paul's parents. The trio became involved in various criminal ideas, including poisoning Susan with crushed prescription pills or arranging for her to be electrocuted in the bath. They also considered using a baseball bat, knives to cause serious injury. Paul even thought about shooting his father and stepmother, while Marilee planned to stab her mother while she slept. In the final phase of their plan, the teenagers intended to steal Susan's car, take their parents' money, and escape to Canada. On September 22, 2008, 14-year-old Marilee White had been missing for several days and had not answered her phone. Concerned, her mother reported her daughter as missing. Marilee's friends were also unable to contact her. Marilee's mother took action by distributing flyers with Marilee's photo and contacting the police. Fortunately, a patrol found Marilee wandering aimlessly on the outskirts of town and brought her home. During this time, Marilee revealed that Paul, a friend, had abandoned her. The police persuaded her not to run away again, and it appeared that she had calmed down. However, on the morning of September 23, 2008, Marilee's mother woke up feeling a strange presence. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marilee standing over her bed with a large kitchen knife. Instead of attacking, she reacted defensively as Marilee demanded the car keys to drive to the Bailey family's house. Marilee planned to gather others and escape to Canada. Although she reluctantly gave her the keys, she prevented Marilee from leaving. As soon as Marilee stepped outside, she called the police. Authorities intercepted Marilee and took her to a juvenile detention center. There, Marilee told her cellmate about a plan to kill their parents, but nobody took her seriously. At this time, Paul Henson waited for his father and stepmother to leave their trailer in the morning to go shopping. He broke into his father's room and took his .22 caliber handgun. He intended to shoot them when they returned, but they unexpectedly stopped at a movie theater and then went to visit friends, which delayed him return. Frustrated by the wait, Paul decided to leave and went back to Susan's house. That evening, Marilee was released from custody, and at the same time, Paul's parents reported him missing. The next day, September 24, David took a large knife with him to school. When the school administration learned about it, they issued a written warning to his mother. Susan put the warning on the refrigerator, but was too busy to address it right away. The following day, a police officer approached her to inform her about the search for Paul Henson, suggesting he might be at their house. Although she couldn't find him there, she noticed clear signs that he had been visiting frequently. The detective asked for permission to enter the house and talk to Jennifer, and she agreed. From the beginning, Jennifer seemed nervous. The detective knew about the teenager's deceptive plan and decided to ask Jennifer where Paul was. She said she hadn't seen her boyfriend since Saturday. The detective then requested to speak with her alone, but her mother, Susan, refused. Suspecting that Paul might be hiding in the house, the detective asked to search the premises, but Susan denied the request, stating that a warrant was needed. As a result, the detective left without any new information. The search for Paul continued, and another police officer arrived at the Bailey home. This time, Susan was informed that there were reports suggesting Paul might have a missing .22 caliber pistol from his father's trailer. Worried about safety, she reluctantly allowed the search, although she was not happy about it. During the search, they found several suspicious items, including a large butcher knife, hidden under a couch cushion in the living room. Since the knife did not belong to the Baileys, Susan accused Jennifer of planning to run away with Paul again. Jennifer explained that her friend might have accidentally left his knife at her house during his last visit, but this explanation did not convince Susan. Without waiting for the police to leave, Susan started arguing with her daughter again. Susan threatened to send her to live with her father or grandparents. During a search of Jennifer's room, they found evidence that she was packing her belongings. They also discovered several knives, which raised suspicions. However, since they couldn't find Paul's gun, the police left the house. Later, the mother found a box of ammunition hidden in one of the suitcases and became worried. She called the police again, requesting a more thorough search of her home. When they returned, the police took the ammunition but still did not find a gun. Instead, they found even more knives scattered around the house. In the trash, they found an empty bottle of antidepressants that belonged to Marilee. The Bailey family did not use such medications, but the police were unaware of this girl at the time and overlooked these concerning signs. Paul's father arrived at the house anxious about his son. He packed up Paul's belongings and left with everyone else. The following day, Susan struggled to find a way to resolve issues with her children, but nothing seemed to work. On September 25, she went to her regular job, followed by her second job, finally finishing around midnight. Throughout the day, Susan tried to contact her children, but both ignored her calls and messages. When she got home, she immediately sensed that something was off. The lights were off. Inside, she discovered the usual chaos left by her children. As she moved upstairs in the darkness, the house felt eerily quiet. As Susan climbed the stairs, someone suddenly grabbed her by the neck and covered her mouth with a cloth that had a chemical smell. Just then, Jennifer, Paul, and David stepped out of the shadows. They quickly slit Susan's throat and began stabbing her repeatedly with knives until she lay motionless on the floor within minutes. However, this horrific act was only part of their sinister plan. On September 26, Susan's mother received multiple calls from worried colleagues about Susan, as she had not shown up for her shifts that morning, a surprising behavior for someone who was known to be a workaholic. Susan's mother made several attempts to contact Susan, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, she reached out to the police department in Roanoke, Texas, asking them to check on the Bailey family's home. Over the next 2 days, patrol officers visited the house multiple times, but found no evidence that anyone was there. The lights were off, no cars were in the driveway, and all the doors and windows were closed. There were no signs of distress. It appeared as if the family had gone on vacation. Despite this, Susan's mother was deeply concerned that something might have gone wrong and urged the police to continue investigating. At 3:30 a.m. on September 28, 2008, a police officer in South Dakota spotted a suspicious vehicle parked near a closed gas station. He stopped to observe and noticed a teenager got out without turning on the headlights, did something briefly, then returned to the vehicle, and they all drove away. The officer decided to follow them. He saw that the car had Texas license plates, indicating they had traveled a long distance. However, it was unusual for teenagers to be out so late alone, making the situation seem very odd. The police officer pulled over the car and noticed a teenager driving. In the passenger seat was another minor, a girl, and in the back seat was a younger boy with a large dog. The car was stopped, and they were asked for identification, but none of them had any. The driver was 16-year-old Paul Henson. When the police officer checked his information, he discovered that Paul had been reported as a runaway and was also a suspect in a firearms case. The car belonged to Susan Bailey. Backup was requested, and they searched the stolen vehicle, but no gun was found. Jennifer's statements were inconsistent from the beginning. She appeared frightened and exhausted. Meanwhile, Texas police were alerted that the missing persons had been located. When Texas detectives heard this, they realized that Susan would never have allowed her children to travel that far without her. They suspected that something had happened to her and decided it was time to thoroughly investigate the Bailey home, especially after numerous requests from Susan's parents and colleagues. Upon entering the house, the detectives were immediately hit by a strong smell of decomposition. On the first floor, they found only a plate of pudding that had fallen on the floor. Forensic analysis later revealed that the pudding was laced with drugs. On the second floor, at the top of the stairs, they discovered Susan lying face down, blood everywhere. She had suffered 26 stab wounds and had been brutally beaten with a blunt object. The bathtub was filled with water, and an electric cord with exposed wires was hanging from the curtain plugged in. It appeared that someone had meticulously planned multiple methods to murder her. The smell of decomposition mixed with the smell of toiletries. A receipt found in the house confirmed that 13-year-old David had purchased these cleaning supplies at a local Walmart at the indicated time. In Jennifer's room, investigators found a diary in which she detailed plans for committing murder and starting a new life with Paul in Canada. They also uncovered additional evidence, including freshly cut hair belonging to Paul, clothing stained with Susan's blood, and DNA traces from Jennifer and David. It was clear that the teenagers had not effectively cleaned up the murder scene. The 3 suspects were detained in Texas, while a dog associated with them was taken to a shelter. The juvenile offenders quickly began to speak. Paul Henson accused David of the murder, claiming they all fled their town to protect the boy from the authorities. When detectives questioned David, he admitted to killing his mother and laughed. The detectives were taken aback. They did not expect such a response from a 13-year-old. Jennifer placed all the blame on Paul, insisting that she and her brother had done nothing wrong. The only person who avoided severe punishment was Marilee White, who was not in the car and had no evidence linking her to Susan's murder. However, she remained under police scrutiny for a long time and was questioned multiple times. Eventually, Marilee confirmed her friend's boyfriend's claims that they had planned to kill their families. She shared many details about their relationships. According to Marilee, Paul, Jennifer, and she had become very close. Paul enjoyed being intimate with both girls simultaneously, arguing that since he was dating Jennifer and had a separate relationship with Marilee, it wasn't cheating. The group engaged in occult practices, including cutting themselves and drinking each other's blood. Jennifer's plan was to kill all their parents, escape to Canada, and start their own commune. Because of her cooperation with the police, no charges were filed against Marilee. She was compelled to testify at the trial against the other conspirators. Based on her testimony, the prosecution believed that Jennifer ambushed her mother in a hallway on the second floor and attacked her with a bat, while Paul Henson came from behind and cut her throat. David also took part in the crime and inflicted superficial stab wounds on her body. Jennifer and Paul, despite being minors, were tried as adults for murder and each received a 60-year prison sentence. They will be eligible for parole starting in 2038. David was also tried as an adult for his involvement in the crime and was convicted of complicity, receiving a 26-year sentence. He will be eligible for release in 2034 when he turns 40. Following these events, Marilee White moved to a different state with her mother and changed her name. Her photo is kept confidential to protect her safety, as she was a young witness. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alexandra Kogut. Alexandra Kogut, 18, was a freshman at the State University of New York at Brockport. She was outgoing and fun-loving. Alexandra had been in a relationship with her boyfriend, Clayton Whitmore, for about 2 years. The couple had met in high school in New Hartford, New York, where they began dating. Despite attending different schools after graduation, they had maintained a close relationship. Although their schools were 3 hours apart, they kept in touch through phone calls, social media messages, and frequent visits. Clayton was a great guy who played hockey at Utica College in New York while studying to become an accountant. He was a skilled athlete and a promising hockey player, and many believed he had a bright future ahead of him. Alexandra's family and friends liked Clayton and considered him a promising young man. They hoped that their relationship would develop into something serious over time. In high school, Alexandra had participated in track and field as well as swimming. She also represented her university in competitions. On Friday, September 28, 2012, Alexandra was excited because her boyfriend, Clayton, was coming to visit her for the weekend. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, and Alexandra missed him. Around 3 p.m., she asked her friend and neighbor if she could borrow some clothes. The two often shared outfits, and her friend agreed. Together, they picked out a nice dress. After trying on dresses, Alexandra went to a swim team meeting. She was running late, so Clayton, who had arrived earlier, had to wait for her. Alexandra called him to let him know she would be late. When Alexandra returned from the swim team meeting, she met Clayton, and together they went to visit a friend of his for dinner. They didn't return to campus until after midnight. Alexandra had assured her mother that she would call or text when she got back to avoid causing concern, but she didn't. This was unusual because Alexandra was always reliable in such matters. Her mother became increasingly worried, sensing that something was wrong. At 2:42 a.m., her mother decided to contact university security and requested a welfare check on her daughter. University security responded quickly and went to Alexandra's dormitory to check. They knocked on the door, which was unlocked, and entered the room. Inside, they found a horrific scene. The dormitory room, which Alexandra and her roommate shared, was covered in blood. In the middle of the room lay a young girl, face down and dead. The victim had multiple injuries, and it was immediately clear that this was not an accident but a brutal murder. Alarmed, they quickly called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they found a photo of Alexandra and Clayton together, and they recognized Clayton. That night, the police saw him walking down the street with a girl. He was holding an open can of beer, which attracted the attention of a patrol officer. Clayton was ticketed for the open can of beer but remained calm and cooperative. He then threw the can away and crossed the street, disappearing from sight. As the investigation progressed, it was revealed that Alexandra and her boyfriend, Clayton, had gone to her dorm room together. It was later discovered that Clayton had planned to flee to Canada after the incident. Police began interviewing dorm residents to identify witnesses and gather more evidence. However, most students were not in their rooms at the time. Many had gone home for the weekend, while others were partying or visiting friends. Some residents reported hearing screams and sounds of fighting in the distance but paid little attention, as such noises were common. At around 3 a.m., Clayton's father called 911 and informed the police that his son had confessed to the murder. He explained that Clayton had called him, sounding very agitated, and admitted to doing something terrible. However, Clayton's father had no further details to provide and suggested that the police contact Clayton directly. He also mentioned that he did not know his son's exact location. Police attempted to contact Clayton and trace his phone but were unsuccessful. When they called Clayton's father back, he mentioned that Clayton's girlfriend was in Brockport and that Clayton might still be with her. At this point, police determined that Clayton was still near the crime scene. A patrol car was dispatched to the scene approximately 45 minutes after Clayton's father's initial call. Shortly thereafter, Clayton himself called 911, stating that he wanted to surrender because he had committed a terrible crime. Police located and arrested Clayton Whitmore at approximately 4 a.m. at a rest stop on the New York State Thruway. At this point, police confirmed that the murdered woman was Alexandra Kogut. They discovered that she had used her key card to enter the dormitory building just before she was killed. At the police station, Clayton was questioned to determine what had happened that night and why Alexandra had been killed. Clayton insisted that his relationship with Alexandra had been normal and respectful. However, he said things had taken a turn for the worse on the evening of the incident. According to him, Alexandra had yelled at him in public for no apparent reason. Although she was sweet and cheerful with others, he felt that she had disrespected him. Clayton believed that her behavior was unreasonable and unacceptable. Clayton admitted that he had been holding back resentment toward Alexandra but finally lost control after being fined while walking down the street. He returned to her room feeling tense. Alexandra told him that she wanted to have a serious talk. She revealed that she suspected Clayton of cheating because, some time ago, a photo of an unfamiliar girl had appeared on his phone. When he failed to provide a clear explanation, Alexandra began provoking him by shouting and acting disrespectfully and aggressively. She then began to push him. Finally, Clayton could not take the pressure anymore. In a fit of rage, he attacked Alexandra, throwing her against the wall. He then began hitting her and was unable to stop. He only realized the severity of his actions when he saw Alexandra lying unconscious on the floor, showing no signs of life. Clayton admitted that, during the attack, he had not thought to stop or try to help her. He told police he had been angry and claimed that it was not intentional and that he had no plan or desire to harm her. Clayton initially fled the scene of the crime. After realizing the severity of his actions, he called his father and confessed. His father urged him to surrender to the police, which he eventually did. Although he expressed remorse, Clayton avoided confirming whether a weapon had been used in the murder. He later revealed more details, stating that after punching Alexandra several times, he noticed her breathing had become labored, and she was making wheezing sounds. In response, he took a curling iron and struck her on the head until the noises stopped. Clayton claimed he was fully conscious at the time. Alexandra's autopsy supported his claim, confirming blunt force trauma to the head as the cause of death. Police found blood on the curling iron, along with other evidence indicating that Alexandra's head injury had also been caused by hitting the wall. Clayton was charged with murder and held without bail pending trial. However, he later recanted his confession and denied his guilt. The investigation continued for a long time as police interviewed people who had been involved with Clayton. It was highly likely that he had intentionally harmed Alexandra. Their suspicions were reinforced by the testimony of Clayton's ex-girlfriend, who revealed that she had been subjected to constant violence from him. She decided to end their relationship after he tried to strangle her during an argument. At one point, it seemed as though he might actually kill her, but he ultimately held back. Out of fear, she fled to another city to escape him. Several of Clayton's friends also confirmed his aggressive and erratic behavior. They described him as short-tempered and hostile. One friend recalled an incident at a bar where Clayton wielded a knife and threatened a group of strangers. By the spring of 2014, the case went to trial. The prosecution presented a recording of Clayton confessing to the murder, along with various pieces of physical evidence collected by forensic experts. His fingerprints and DNA were found at the crime scene. The defense acknowledged that Clayton had committed the murder but argued that it was unintentional. Their goal was to secure a reduced sentence. Clayton's attorneys made it clear to the jury and the court that Clayton had been extremely distressed that evening due to being insulted by Alexandra, being fined by the police, and being pressured by Alexandra during a conversation about his betrayal. They argued that these factors had caused Clayton to become emotionally unstable. They claimed that he had lost control and directed his anger at Alexandra. The lawyers stressed that Alexandra had provoked Clayton and that the murder should be considered to have occurred in a state of emotional distress. Clayton blamed his aggressive and emotionally unstable behavior on his father. He explained that his aggression stemmed from years of abuse at the hands of his father, who had treated him and other family members cruelly. According to Clayton, he had suffered years of pressure, moral degradation, and physical abuse from his father. Clayton recounted incidents such as his father beating his brother with a baseball bat, breaking his sister's nose, and kicking his mother. Once, when his father found the children's fingerprints in the car, he tried to force the children to eat the TV remote. Clayton expressed remorse for not being able to resist his father's abusive influence, admitting that he had become a mirror image of his father, whom he despised. Clayton admitted that this led him to humiliate and abuse his girlfriend, act aggressively, and harbor hatred for the world. He apologized to Alexandra's family, expressing genuine remorse for his inability to change his behavior. The prosecution pointed out that there were almost no photographs of Clayton smiling. He appeared cold and distant in all of them. Was this behavior part of his nature? While prosecutors did not dispute Clayton's allegations of abuse by his father, they argued that this did not excuse his actions. The trial lasted about 3 weeks, during which dozens of witnesses testified. The jury deliberated and eventually returned a verdict, finding Clayton Whitmore guilty. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Clayton showed no emotion throughout the trial, but after the verdict was announced, he broke down and cried. Notably, Alexandra's family was shocked to learn about the alleged abuse she endured during the relationship. They were unaware of any problems between Alexandra and Clayton, as she had never mentioned any cruelty or aggression toward her. However, when police examined Alexandra's phone, they uncovered at least 30 threatening voice messages from Clayton. It is believed there may have been more, but these recordings were not thoroughly analyzed. Police dismissed this evidence, citing the need for voice analysis, which could have further delayed the case. As a result, none of these threats were presented in court. This evidence could have led to the case being reclassified as first-degree murder, which carries a harsher sentence than manslaughter. About an hour before Alexandra was fatally beaten, she posted a final message on her social media page. It is unclear what was on her mind at the time, but she may have sensed impending danger. Following Alexandra's tragic death, her relatives established a charity to support women who have endured domestic violence, encouraging them to report their experiences and raising public awareness of the issue. Supporters of the charity identify themselves by painting their pinkies purple, a tribute to Alexandra's favorite color. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Elizabeth Espino Vasquez. Elizabeth Vasquez Marin was born in a city located in the Cajamarca department of Peru. Her parents were 6 children. The parents loved them all dearly and worked incredibly hard to raise their children in prosperity. Elizabeth's childhood was happy and cheerful, as is often the case in a family with many children. She got along well with her 5 siblings. During her university studies, Elizabeth met a young man, Alejandro Espino, whom she married in 1987. A year later, they had their first and only daughter, whom they named Elizabeth Espino Vasquez, affectionately called Alida by everyone. By that time, both Alida's parents were balancing family life with their careers. Elizabeth began to develop her career as a lawyer, studying 2 majors simultaneously at university in Lima, while her husband was also working toward his career as a lawyer. Years later, his career advancement led him to the position of prosecutor in the fight against corruption. The hectic pace of life left them with almost no time to care for their little girl, who, during the first 4 years of her life, was raised by her grandparents on her mother's side. They provided her with the love that her parents could not, and additionally, Alida grandparents' youngest daughter was Alida's age, allowing them to grow up like sisters. Every birthday of Alida's was celebrated like a grand holiday and served as a wonderful reason for the whole family to gather. At every family event, Alida was always by her aunt's side. The 2 girls constantly played pranks together and were never scolded. Instead, they were spoiled and had their wishes fulfilled, which led to them being jokingly labeled as spoiled. When Alida turned 4, her parents decided, in her best interests, to move to the Lima department since it was time for her to start kindergarten and they wanted her to have access to quality education from an early age. Moreover, moving to the capital afforded Alida other privileges. To make up for the time she could not spend with her only daughter, her mother showered Alida with various gifts, leading her to live like a queen. She had the best toys, designer clothes, trips abroad, and a top-notch education. Additionally, Maureen indulged all her whims. Despite this, the little girl often felt out of place, unable to rely on her mother's company, who was busy managing several businesses. Nevertheless, Maureen tried to spend all her free time with Alida. Eventually, they grew so close that they resembled best friends. Unfortunately, this closeness vanished without a trace when Alida reached her teenage years. In an instant, she transformed into a problematic teen, and the first warning sign was her plummeting school performance, despite having always been the best student. Shortly thereafter, constant quarrels with her mother ensued. Alida's resentment began to fester because everyone around her admired her mother, specifically, her mother's success at work, beauty, and gentle demeanor. Alida did not possess the same physical attributes as her mother, which consumed her with strong jealousy. At every opportunity, she would question why she looked so different from her mother. In an attempt to reconnect with her daughter, Elizabeth continued to indulge her desires and shower her with gifts. Among these requests were plastic surgeries and other measures aimed at enhancing Alida's beauty. Elizabeth supported and financed these efforts in hopes that Alida's confidence and self-esteem would improve, but the girl remained unsatisfied. Her hatred for her mother only deepened. Elizabeth and Alejandro's divorce in 2007 only exacerbated the situation. Alida blamed her mother for it all, and her resentment intensified. Around the same time, Alida began dating a young man named Fernando Gonzalez Asenjo, whom she met at a Mormon church in the San Isidro area. Few people knew that Fernando attended the church solely to exploit unsuspecting young believers with considerable money. His scheme was simple. He would tell wealthy young women that his family was very poor, that he lived alone with his mother, and that his father had abandoned the family when he was just a small boy. By pretending to be a good son, a victim, he evoked pity from the girls and gained their affection. Alida was no exception. In reality, Fernando was a problematic individual. He had no job, didn't even try to study, wanted an easy life. Fernando understood that Alida would easily succumb to manipulation and would support him, while Alida did not realize that Fernando was simply using her. When Elizabeth found out that her daughter was dating a young man from the church, she was happy because she thought he was a hardworking and good boy. Additionally, when Alida talked about the difficulties that Fernando had allegedly faced, Elizabeth decided to help him get his life on track. She rented him an inexpensive apartment so that he could live away from his mother and paid for his schooling, during which he was supposed to study business so that later, Maureen could offer him a job in one of her companies. However, Fernando did not take advantage of this opportunity and attended only 2 classes. When Elizabeth learned about this, she was very upset. Understanding that Fernando was dear to her daughter, she decided to give him another chance and offered him a job as a manager's assistant. Fernando missed that opportunity as well. He was fired after losing a check for a substantial amount of money, even though he was simply supposed to deliver it from one place to another. Furthermore, Fernando did not pay Elizabeth rent for the apartment, despite their agreement that she would let him live there for a minimum price, not for free. This behavior convinced Elizabeth that he was with Alida only for her money. She forbade her daughter from continuing the relationship, thinking she could break them apart. Maureen decided to send Alida to the United States for a vacation at her younger sister's house, with whom Alida had been very close in childhood. This decision turned out to be perfect. She hoped her daughter could meet other boys and forget about Fernando. Ultimately, this plan did not work, and the couple continued their long-distance relationship. Just a couple of months later, Alida returned to Lima to start studying at the law school of the Peruvian University of Applied Sciences. At the same time, Fernando moved to another apartment and began living alone, but he was able to afford this not because he found a job, but because Alida was paying all his bills. She received this money from her mother, who gave her about $450 a month for her university expenses. This amount, of course, was not enough for the lavish lifestyle Fernando hoped for. Therefore, to please her boyfriend, Alida snuck into her mother's room and stole her wallet. Elizabeth soon noticed the missing money, which led to a fierce argument between mother and daughter. Alida denied taking the money, but by that time, Elizabeth suspected that her daughter was still seeing Fernando, and the situation with the money helped confirm this. Intending to find out the truth, Elizabeth checked her daughter's computer. She found her correspondence with Fernando. In the messages, she also saw that Fernando was demanding rent payments, meals from expensive restaurants, and branded clothing from Alida. This situation was the last straw for Elizabeth. In turn, Alida interpreted this as a declaration of war. By July 2009, Elizabeth reduced the amount of money she gave her daughter for expenses and began to keep track of every penny she spent. Of course, all of this drove Alida to despair, as she could no longer indulge her boyfriend's desires. Alida's dissatisfaction grew. She wanted money, power, and freedom. She planned to achieve this at any cost, even ignoring the fact that Elizabeth was doing all of this for her sake. It was then that Alida decided to cross all boundaries and began to devise a plan to get rid of her own mother. Alida's plan was to inherit her mother's fortune, which was estimated at $4 million at that time. Additionally, Elizabeth had investments in the insurance market, owned several companies, and had several insurance policies, which Alida did not suspect. Little did she know that her mother was one step ahead in her efforts to protect her daughter from Fernando. She had rewritten her will, and in the event of her death, all her assets would go to Elizabeth's father, who would be obliged to take care of Alida. As if foreseeing what was about to happen, Elizabeth met with her parents, brothers, and sisters to inform them of her decision. She told them she was doing this for Alida, because she feared for her safety and her daughter's safety, having realized that Fernando was an unreliable person capable of causing harm for his own desires. Unfortunately, Maureen was not mistaken. While Elizabeth was doing everything possible for Alida's well-being, she was unhappy that Elizabeth did not accept her relationship with Fernando, and that Elizabeth had taken away some privileges. Alida planned to stage a kidnapping to escape with her boyfriend and use the money obtained to gain the freedom she so desperately wanted. Greed, envy, beauty, constant quarrels, the thirst for money, and Fernando's bad influence led Alida to devise a plan to murder her mother. Enlisting the help of her boyfriend Fernando and a friend of Fernando's named Jorge Cornejo Ruiz, who was 22 years old, to help them commit the crime that was to take place on the night of January 26, 2010. On that day, Alida went to work with Elizabeth and asked her for about $3 supposedly to print some university assignments. In fact, she spent that money to take a taxi home, let Fernando and his friend into their house. The guys hid in Elizabeth's room and were to wait for her return from work. Alida told them that when Elizabeth entered the room, they should immediately strangle Elizabeth as they had previously agreed. After talking to her accomplices, Alida returned to work with Elizabeth. Eventually, Alida and Elizabeth returned home around 10:30 p.m. Alida deliberately made a small noise so that Fernando and Jorge could hear. Unsuspecting, Elizabeth went up to her room and turned on the light. At that moment, Fernando, standing behind her, began to strangle Elizabeth while his accomplice Jorge held Elizabeth by her legs. Elizabeth managed to break free for a moment and resist, but Fernando quickly regained his footing, subdued her. When it was over, Alida went to the kitchen where the 19-year-old maid, Maria Liliana Huaman Chucolin, was at the time. She ordered Maria to go to her room and lock herself in there. After that, Alida returned to Elizabeth's room. While Fernando and Jorge held her down, Alida lunged at Elizabeth, began demanding money from her, forcing her to give the password to the accounts or hand over the safe's key. Until that moment, Elizabeth thought that Fernando was acting alone to take revenge on her, but upon seeing that her daughter was involved in the attack, she gathered her strength to lunge at Alida. Elizabeth managed to grab Alida by her arms and scratch her chest. When the fight was almost over, Elizabeth kicked her daughter several times in the legs. This last act enraged Alida, after which she struck her mother severely, pressed a pillow to her face to suffocate her. When Elizabeth stopped breathing, the criminals proceeded with their plan. Fernando and Jorge took the body, moved it to the trunk of Elizabeth's car. Meanwhile, Alida went to distract the guard. She talked to him and asked him to go to the pharmacy to buy some medicine. Thus, they managed to remove the body. They planned to hide it and the car to stage everything as if it were a kidnapping. The screams and sounds of the struggle were heard by the maid, which scared her greatly, but she could do nothing to help Elizabeth as Alida had locked her in and she had no way to escape the room on her own. Early in the morning at 5 a.m., Maria woke up and made orange juice for Elizabeth as she always did. At that time, Alida appeared and told her to drink the juice because her mother had already gone to work. After that, she went to her mother's workplace, where Elizabeth's accountant was already present. Alida told her that the criminals had contacted her and claimed that Elizabeth had been kidnapped. Elizabeth's accountant immediately blocked all of her boss's bank accounts to prevent the criminals from carrying out bank transfers. Jessica also noticed that Alida looked worried, that there were bruises on her arms and legs, but she did not pay much attention to it as at that moment she was only thinking about Elizabeth. She immediately reported the kidnapping to law enforcement while Alida called her relatives to tell them what had happened. When she returned to the office, she was shocked by the state of her workspace. There was chaos everywhere and many documents were scattered across the desk. At that moment, she did not notice that several important documents, including a will that Elizabeth claimed had been made a few months earlier, were missing. This will then caused a legal dispute between her relatives. While the police began investigating the disappearance from the tourist area, a horrifying message came in. An abandoned car had been found with a lifeless body inside. The body was taken to the morgue, where forensic experts conducted analyses and immediately established the cause of death as suffocation, discovering traces of violence on various parts of her body. The news of Elizabeth's death shocked her family and those around her. Everyone who knew and loved her could not believe that such a hard-working, kind woman could have been killed in such a terrible way. At the funeral, Alida appeared to be grief-stricken and inconsolable. In the following days, she displayed only cold behavior and a vacant gaze, as though she were not at all affected by her mother's death. Furthermore, she provided nonsensical explanations for what had happened that day. Her grandmother and grandfather felt that they no longer knew the girl they had raised, loved so much in her childhood. The investigation began by examining threats that Elizabeth's ex-husband had received a few months prior. He was a talented lawyer and at that time worked as a prosecutor fighting corruption. Investigators speculated that a possible reason for the disappearance could have been his significant role in the arrest of the mafia and a well-known banned substance dealer. He had powerful enemies, and their involvement seemed obvious, but the investigation in that direction led nowhere. The detectives assigned to the case then decided to focus on a person who could have been the organizer of the crime. By that time, enough evidence and conflicting witness statements had been gathered, indicating that the perpetrator could have been Alida, Elizabeth's only daughter. Despite her display of mourning at the funeral, the police had lingering suspicions, as during the interrogations, Alida provided contradictory stories. During her first interrogation, she stated that she had come home late in the evening and immediately gone to her room to study. At 2 a.m., she realized she was hungry and went down to the kitchen. When she returned, the door to her mother's room was locked, but the light was still on inside. Alida recounted that her mother had left for work early on the morning of January 27th, after which she received a call from the criminals informing her that her mother had been taken hostage and that they would release her in exchange for a ransom. Detectives managed to establish that this call never occurred. Instead, they discovered that on that day, Alida had made numerous calls to Fernando. Following this finding, they became the primary suspects in the case. When Alida was called back for questioning, she claimed that she had never argued with her mother, a statement confirmed by her father, who at the time was already a district judge and the chairman of the Supreme Court of Amazonas. He stated that their family was very close, even despite the divorce, and insisted that the reason for Elizabeth's death was revenge from her enemies, although this version had already been dismissed by authorities. Additionally, there was other evidence against Alida and Fernando. Although the criminals had wiped the fingerprints, a luminol test revealed that Elizabeth's blood had been found throughout the house. A crucial element in the investigation was the testimony of the maid, who described that terrible night, noting that she heard Elizabeth's cries for help but could not assist her because Alida had locked her in. She added that in the morning, she performed her household duties, but Alida came and said that her mother had already left for work. There is also the testimony of the guard. Later, Elizabeth's best friend testified that mother and daughter often had intense arguments, and sometimes Alida even attacked her mother. Considering all the gathered evidence and testimonies, on February 9th, the Homicide Investigation Department of the National Police of Peru appealed to the on-duty judge for the preliminary arrest of 3 suspects in this crime. Alida was arrested around noon. Just a couple of hours later, her accomplices, Fernando and Jorge, were also apprehended. During Alida's arrest, she was accompanied by her father, Alejandro Espino, and 2 defense attorneys. After Alida was placed in custody, she underwent a forensic examination, during which it was determined that she had injuries on her hands and feet that had occurred up to 10 days prior, around the time of the crime. After intensive interrogations, the first to admit responsibility was Fernando, followed by Jorge. Consequently, Alida felt she had no choice but to confess her guilt as well. Alida revealed that on the night of the maid, she distracted the guard, allowing her accomplices to break into Elizabeth's room. Furthermore, she stated that she cleaned up the crime scene and that it was Fernando who took Elizabeth's life. Alida did not conceal her motives, stating that she acted out of frustration with the imposed rules and the prohibitions on seeing her boyfriend. Meanwhile, The head of the forensic department emphasized the composure of the criminals, who confessed to committing their actions fully aware of the consequences and without being under the influence of alcohol or illegal substances. The criminals also revealed that they had planned to take Elizabeth's life several months prior when her relationship with Alida became unbearable. However, this was not the only motive. Another goal was to collect a life insurance policy worth $100,000. As new details of the case emerged and were covered in the media, public sentiment towards Alida deteriorated day by day, peaking when it became known that she was the one who initiated the crime that led to her mother's death. However, Alida's grandfather decided to visit his granddaughter in prison, hoping to hug and forgive her, as she was his blood. To his surprise, during one of these visits, Alida began to behave coldly towards him, insulting him, even telling him not to return. This occurred in March, 2 months after Elizabeth's death. Following this, he stated that Alida was now dead to him and immediately filed a lawsuit to exclude her from the inheritance due to her unworthy behavior, intending to prevent Alida from receiving her mother's inheritance. Consequently, a legal battle over the inheritance began between Alida and her family. Despite Elizabeth's relatives assuring that there was a will in favor of Alida's grandfather, this document, as previously mentioned, mysteriously disappeared from Elizabeth's office and from the city registrar's office. The accountant who worked with Elizabeth noted that the only person with access to Elizabeth's documents was her own daughter. By May of that same year, Alida initiated the process of the will from prison in an attempt to inherit her mother's estate, but she was unaware that she was not the only heir. Alejandro also filed a lawsuit, claiming that he and Elizabeth were not divorced but had merely decided to live separately and, in his opinion, he had the right to receive half of the estate as her widower. Liliana Vasquez Marin asserted that her sister and Alejandro divorced in 2007 with mutual consent and that both already had new partners. Alejandro's response was swift. He confirmed that they had indeed begun the divorce process but never finalized it, as they were concerned about their daughter and thought that finalizing the divorce might significantly impact her. Amid this inheritance dispute, another brother of Elizabeth intervened to assert that when they were handling the funeral, Alejandro was only interested in money. Additionally, he emphasized that it was too suspicious that two key documents in this case, the divorce certificate and the will in which his sister bequeathed all her property to their father, had gone missing. He also reported that Alida's father, taking advantage of his position and influence as a lawyer, publicly stated that his daughter would be sentenced to only 8 years in prison and would be released on parole after 3 years. Faced with these issues, the family lawyer provided the court with an executive document recognizing a foreign judgment, which stated that Elizabeth had divorced in the United States by mutual consent and that this document was valid in Peru. Over the next several months, Alida attempted to launch a campaign against her grandfather, choosing to slander him. She even dared to claim that he and one of her uncles were responsible for Elizabeth's death. The family was easily able to debunk these statements, asserting that Alida did this solely to harm her grandfather. Disappointment and grief gradually took a toll on his health and well-being, leading to his demise on December 27, 2011. He suffered a heart attack that resulted in his death. His remains were buried at the Campo Cemetery in Huapi, alongside those of his daughter, Elizabeth. After Alida's grandfather's death, the Vasquez family increased the number of lawsuits Alida to eliminate the possibility of them inheriting wealth. In the midst of the battles for inheritance, a lawsuit was simultaneously ongoing against Alida and her 2 accomplices for the death of Elizabeth. The first court hearing was scheduled for April 12 and was to take place in the 3rd Criminal Chamber for prisoners. However, the hearing was postponed until the 24th of that month after the court denied Alejandro's request to participate as a civil party in the process. When the time finally arrived for the first hearing, the suspects appeared in court dressed in black, with black nails, black pants, and a purple blouse. Alida attempted to appear calm, but her facade crumbled as soon as Ivan Melgar, the senior assistant prosecutor from the 9th prosecution of Lima, began mentioning more than 15 witnesses who would be called during the proceedings. Among these witnesses were Elizabeth's maid and the suspects, who were asked to testify about their state of mind the day before the crime was committed. The prosecution requested a repeated psychiatric evaluation for Alida after her defense requested to declare her innocent on the grounds that she had been suffering from bipolar disorder since 2007. During the debates, the deputy chief prosecutor officially filed for 30 years of imprisonment for her and the two other defendants, in addition to a payment of $27,000 as damages in civil proceedings. After the prosecution presented evidence, she pleaded not guilty and refused to claim any early dismissal or sentencing. On May 14, 2012, Fernando González Asenjo was sentenced to 28 years of imprisonment, and a week later, on May 21, Jorge Cornejo Ruiz received a similar sentence. While testifying, Alida accusing her former partner and his friend of planning, carrying out the attack on her mother. She also insisted that they had been hired by her uncle, who allegedly had connections to the illegal banned substance trade. This statement was supported by her father, who stated that the real criminals had exploited his daughter's mental illness to cause Elizabeth's death. Neither the victim's family nor the public believed this assertion. The trial took an unexpected turn when Fernando testified in court. During his testimony, he stated that he and Jorge had decided to commit the crime after Alida invited them to her home on January 26, 2010. Faced with this unexpected situation, the prosecution noted that Fernando's testimony contradicted his earlier statements made during the investigative phase, where he had claimed that he, Jorge, and Fernando had jointly planned the crime. Now, he had retracted his words. Given the circumstances, the prosecution announced that a confrontation would take place among the three suspects, mandated Jorge and Fernando to testify in court as witnesses. Eventually, Jorge provided testimony that Alida had offered him $20,000 not to speak about the events of that fateful night. Details also emerged regarding a plan devised by Fernando, in which the criminal group was supposed to go missing along with her mother, but Jorge asserted that he did not agree to be part of this plan. The Jorge's lawyer noted that it was established that his client did not participate in either planning the events that led to Elizabeth's death or in carrying out the attack. Ultimately, Alida made a shocking statement, saying that she did not regret that Fernando killed her mother, claiming she had clearly seen it and did not want to take responsibility for what he did. The lawyer also assured that Fernando's statements were spontaneous and that he had received no bribes to change his original statement. The maid, Maria Liliana, also noted that Elizabeth was against her daughter's relationship with Fernando because Elizabeth considered him a slacker. She reiterated her previous statements regarding Alida's confession and Alejandro's threats. After these testimonies, the prosecution and oversight body requested a copy of her statements to initiate an investigation against Senior Judge Alejandro in connection with the alleged threats he made toward Maria. At the time the appeal was initiated, the court granted Alida's request to recognize her as the heir to her deceased grandfather's estate. This caused outrage in the Vasquez family, who filed an appeal against the aforementioned ruling. According to the family's lawyer, it was proven that the accused was involved in the events that led to her mother's death, and that was sufficient to strip her of any chance of inheriting property from their family. Even greater uncertainty in the judicial proceedings was introduced by 4 experts tasked with establishing the psychological profile of Alida. As they reached contradictory conclusions, 2 stated that she actually had bipolar disorder affecting her ability to think clearly, while the other 2 declared that the disorder altered her emotional capabilities but not her consciousness. Consequently, she was very well aware and understood what she was doing, and she was fully responsible for her actions. One of the psychologists provided the court with drawings by Alida and printed statistics indicating that she had an above-average IQ, which suggested that she could manipulate others. Based on the results of the psychological testing, the prosecution claimed that the bipolar disorder referred to by Alida's defense was not an illness but an emotional disorder. Therefore, she should be deemed sane and receive a strict punishment. At one of the final hearings, expert testimony was presented by the specialist who examined Elizabeth. He reported that the bloodstains found in Elizabeth's car suggested that she may have still been alive when she was placed there. During his closing arguments, the senior assistant prosecutor stated that at the time of the crime, the accused was not suffering from bipolar disorder, was stable, and most likely had carefully planned everything in advance. After countless attempts by Alida, Elizabeth Espino Vasquez, to distort what happened and deny the truth, on December 24, 2012, she was found guilty of murdering her mother, Elizabeth Vasquez Marin, and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. While the judge read the sentence, she pulled out an icon and, with tears in her eyes, began to pray, tearfully declaring that the sentence was unfair. For several minutes, she spoke with her lawyer, who stated that he would appeal the verdict. The lawyer continued to insist that various clinical and psychological analyses conducted by renowned specialists showed that Alida suffered from an emotional affective disorder, and this should be taken into account during the review of the sentence. By that time, Alida was still listed as a potential heir to her grandfather's and mother's estates, was therefore continuing to process the necessary documentation to inherit them. In light of this, the Vasquez family demanded that the Fifth World Court make a ruling on the matter, as the procedure had been halted in 2011. However, over the next 8 years, all attempts by the Vasquez family to obtain a judicial decision on this matter were unsuccessful. On January 21, 2021, Alida received news of her father Alejandro's death from natural causes. To this day, legal proceedings regarding whether the Vasquez family can exclude Alida from the list of heirs are ongoing. The entire Vasquez family has stated that this situation has been a true torment for them. This case shook all of Peru, revealing that there are people who, in pursuit of their goals, do not hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way, even their own mother. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Kitterman. When a person capable of betrayal appears in a circle of close friends, this clearly cannot lead to anything good, especially if a love triangle is involved. Lacey Hurst Pavek was born in 1974 in Tonasket, Washington State, a tiny town with a population located south of the Canadian border. Her family owned the largest and most popular restaurant in the city, which made them local celebrities. They were quite wealthy, everyone in the city knew and respected them, some were even afraid of them. According to eyewitnesses, Lacey always had trouble making friends, many children avoided her because she belonged to a privileged background. However, this did not particularly worry Lacey, she had a narrow circle of trusted friends. In high school, Lacey dated boys but only experienced real feelings when she met a young man named Brandon. At least, that was her first love, which eventually developed into marriage. Unfortunately, this relationship did not last long. After some time, Lacey and Brandon decided to get a divorce, with Lacey being the initiator. They then began a fight for sole custody of their children. Lacey's influential family managed to provide her with the best divorce lawyer, and the children remained with her. According to Lacey, the reason for the separation was constant quarrels with her husband, although the specifics were never disclosed. Nevertheless, it was believed that her husband was a decent person who never raised a hand against her. After the divorce, Lacey got a job as a financial director at a car dealership, where she met a man named Danny Pavek. Danny was quite an attractive bachelor, well known in the city and a favorite among women. Many wanted to build a relationship with him, but he, by his own admission, was only interested in wealthy Lacey. Danny warmly accepted her and her children. Their relationship before the wedding lasted almost 8 years, and finally, Lacey had everything she had dreamed of: a family, a new husband, a home, and a career. Despite being very busy, Lacey always found time to relax with her husband, friends, or relatives. Danny was drawn to her cheerful life and willingly participated in various events. Among the regular members of their social circle were friends from high school, including one of Lacey's few friends, Tansy. Tansy was known as a party girl, which made her hesitant to make friendships. She was also involved in distributing illegal substances and loved to throw parties wherever she went. Tansy had a large circle of friends and acquaintances, also from the same town, Michelle Kitterman. She was born on May 12, 1983, alongside her twin sister, Danielle Kitterman. They was born into a loving family and initially lived in Richland, Washington. The sisters shared a very close relationship, and they also had an older sister named Melinda. Despite being born prematurely, the twins grew up healthy in Benton City, Washington, after moving there due to their father's work. Michelle was an energetic, independent girl who wanted to explore the world and build a career. While not particularly interested in family, she was open to having children. Seeking a better life, Michelle moved to Virginia and lived in Maryland for some time. This was during her work in the modeling industry, as her looks were noticed during her senior year in high school. She occasionally received good photography offers. However, everything changed on May 23, 2003, when Michelle, then 20 years old, found herself in a difficult situation. The boy she was seeing abandoned her when he learned she was pregnant. In 2008, the Kitterman family faced their first shock when the twins' father passed away after a long illness. By October of that year, Michelle decided to move back closer to her family. She had always participated in shows, performed in groups, and loved the stage, but what amazed everyone the most was her beauty. Her modeling career was gaining momentum, and many believed she had a bright future ahead, until Michelle got pregnant. Initially, she planned to continue with her modeling career, but now her priorities shifted. She wanted to be a good mother. To stay afloat, Michelle began working part-time in various fields, such as being a waitress or a bartender. It was a tough period, but she eventually secured a job as an administrator at a local private clinic. Michelle was described as a very hard-working, kind mother, remained young, easy-going, and lively. In November 2008, Tansy and Michelle attended a big city party where Michelle caught Danny Pavek's attention. They talked all evening and found it hard to stop. By the end of the night, both realized they were in love with each other. They began to meet secretly despite Danny's marriage to Lacey. He would tell his wife that he was out with friends or working late, but in reality, he was with Michelle. He spent time with Lacey while at home, often stayed late after work, walking until late with friends. He had a wide circle of friends, and Lacey did not suspect that her husband could have an affair, as she trusted him completely. One day, a friend visited Lacey, hoping to catch her at home without Danny. She disclosed Danny's betrayal, which was a real blow for Lacey. However, she composed herself, understanding the small-town dynamics and how well-known their family was, amidst numerous rumors. Lacey expected that this was just another piece of gossip, but days later, Danny confessed. He revealed that he was torn in a love triangle and couldn't choose between the two women. He decided that revealing his secret relationship to his wife would help him break free from the emotional turmoil. Danny admitted that he had been seeing his mistress for several months. And shortly before these events, Michelle became pregnant, which added to the confusion. He shared every detail, including how he met Michelle at the party. He claimed that Tansy introduced them and was the catalyst for his subsequent betrayals. Obviously, he sought to absolve himself of responsibility for his infidelity. After his confession, Lacey threatened to divorce him if he didn't leave his mistress. However, during this time, Michelle was doing the same. She saw Danny as an excellent candidate for a husband and father for her child. Furthermore, Michelle hoped that this new relationship would help her achieve a stable life, which she felt was necessary for her happiness. Although rumors suggested that Danny did not work and lived off his wife, he found himself in a very difficult situation. Lacey demanded that he make a choice, but for Danny, this was a big problem since he liked both women. He had to decide whether to continue living in a marriage with his wealthy wife and children or to leave for his beautiful young mistress. Several days passed during which he shared his internal conflict with friends, claiming that he had decided to leave his family and was going to tell his wife. Lacey was desperate not to lose her beloved husband and was willing to do whatever it took to keep him. On March 1, 2009, a woman contacted the police station of a neighboring city, reporting that she had found the body of a girl who was covered in blood. When the police arrived, they found the deceased in terrible condition on a deserted road in a remote area of the city. The girl was half naked, lying on her jacket, and covered in blood. Her hair was tangled in the barbed wire of a fence along the road. Initially, the cause of death was unclear. Detectives believed that the girl could have gotten lost, was frozen and disoriented due to hypothermia. She might have fallen onto the barbed wire. The police suspected intoxication or the use of illegal substances, but subsequent toxicological examinations did not confirm these suspicions. Further analysis revealed that she was a victim of murder. The unidentified body showed no signs of life and had extensive injuries. The forensic expert counted 39 stab wounds that were unusually shaped, clearly not inflicted by a simple kitchen knife. The victim received deep stab wounds from a weapon resembling an ice pick. These peculiar wounds were concentrated in the neck and abdomen areas, with a large amount of blood around the body, indicating that the victim had put up significant resistance. Identifying the body proved difficult since documents were not found with her. Witnesses insisted that the girl was not a local resident. The only valuable clue was a tattoo on the deceased's body. The police photographed the tattoo and began checking missing persons reports from nearby cities. One of the first cases that caught the detectives' attention was a report from Michelle Kitterman's mother. When shown a photograph of the tattoo, she immediately recognized her daughter, making it evident that the deceased was Michelle, who was in the early weeks of her pregnancy. Condition of the body indicating a personal motive from the killer, possibly jealousy, revenge, or insult. The nature of the injuries suggested that they were likely inflicted by more than one person. The investigators concluded that the crime had likely been committed by a group. Consequently, the police began to investigate Michelle's immediate social circle to understand who could have perpetrated this brutal attack. In their inquiries, they spoke extensively with Michelle's loved ones. Tracy, in particular, mentioned Danny Pavek when asked about Michelle's complicated relationships. She was aware of the love triangle in which Michelle found herself and knew about her daughter's pregnancy. Michelle had expressed her desire to keep the baby and to pursue a life with Danny, aiming to take him away from Lacey, who he had been seeing on the side for several months. Despite the fact that he had the same motive for the murder, wanting to get rid of the annoying mistress and save his marriage with a wealthy wife, this version of events needed to be checked. The investigators first went to the house where he lived with his wife and children. Contrary to expectations, Danny had an alibi during the attack. He was at home with his wife. Lacey was also questioned. She was at home when the police arrived, behaved very calmly, and admitted that she knew about her husband's affair and that his mistress was pregnant. Lacey did not hide her distress over these facts but insisted that they were working on their marriage and trying to save it, that she had nothing to do with Michelle's murder. The detectives didn't notice anything suspicious, so they were forced to leave empty-handed. The police continued their investigation, needing to talk to a dozen more people from the deceased's closest circle of friends. 2 days later, Lacey called the station and admitted that she had a theory about who could be guilty of this bloody massacre. She referred to Tansy. According to Lacey, Michelle had been planning to report Tansy to the police for selling illegal substances for a long time. Lacey believed that Michelle was a police informant, giving Tansy a good reason to get rid of her. However, she could not provide any confirmation of this. This information needed to be checked. Before the police had time to investigate Lacey's claims, another call came into the station. A young man contacted them, saying that he had information for the police but would only share it if he was provided protection. He was seriously afraid for his life because the killers were dangerous people and would inevitably take revenge upon learning what he was going to do. The caller knew that not long ago, a girl had been beaten to death with an ice pick. Since no information about the murder weapon had been published, it was obvious that this was a valuable witness. The informant also referred to Tansy Mathis, mentioning that she sold banned substance and had repeatedly hired people if she faced any problems with her business. This allowed her to collect debts and remove unwanted competitors. The caller knew this well because he had once worked part-time as her personal security guard. However, he assured them that he was not involved in the attack, but he knew who they should investigate closely. According to him, Tansy had hired another individual known in criminal circles as Hollywood, who was supposed to deal with Michelle. The informant indicated that the ice pick had not been randomly chosen, it was provided by a man named David Richards. Of all the names mentioned, the detectives were most interested in Hollywood. After checking the databases, the police managed to locate a man named Brent Phillips, known as Hollywood. The alleged mastermind was arrested first. Brent was found in a rehabilitation center, where he was apparently seeking refuge from police persecution. He denied any wrongdoing, claiming to have had no idea about his actions and expressed that they had no serious motive to deal so cruelly with a pregnant young woman. Nevertheless, it was evident that Tansy was clearly lying because she knew Michelle. It seemed that the police had seasoned criminals in their hands who would not be easy to crack. Yet, contrary to expectations, just 4 days after the arrest, the alleged killer agreed to cooperate with the police. The reason for this, he claimed, was that he did not have enough money after the murder. The suspicions were confirmed. He had indeed participated in the massacre, but he had never been paid for the crime. After violating the terms of his agreement, he decided to cooperate and turn in the mastermind, hoping to receive leniency during sentencing. Brent said that he knew in advance what Tansy intended to do because she might not be able to manage on her own. Therefore, a strong accomplice was necessary. Tansy had convinced several more people in advance, telling them the story that Michelle wanted to cooperate with the police and would hand over the gang. On the evening of Michelle's murder, Tansy, David Richards, and Brent came for their victim, inviting her to go out for a supposedly fun night at a casino. Michelle, who knew these people well, readily agreed, falling into their trap. The group headed towards the gambling establishment, choosing a deserted road outside the city. Instead of going to the casino, however, they drove 50 kilometers away from the city and suddenly pulled over, suggesting that Michelle stop to smoke. She agreed, but after they stopped, they dragged her out into the snow and began to beat her with an ice pick. The first few blows to the stomach were made by Tansy, then she handed the ice pick to Brent because the tool was too heavy for her. Brent himself inflicted many more wounds on the defenseless Michelle. The overall story seemed plausible, but the investigators were still interested in confirming the details. Why was Tansy so angry at her old friend and her unborn child? The first blows of the killer were not made by chance. They were precisely aimed at the stomach, yet Tansy stubbornly remained silent. Analyzing the words of the murderer, the detectives quickly realized that the car in which the company was traveling that evening did not belong to any of them. Everyone had other cars. The brand was identified, indicating that the transport for this trip was rented, but they did not know from whom exactly. The detectives began to investigate the car and managed to find a receipt for the rental. The managers showed the recordings from the surveillance cameras, which indicated that Lacey rented the car in her own name. In addition, she worked there, so she was unmistakably recognized. This made her the main suspect as the jealous wife seeking retribution. Rumors reached the investigators that Lacey had repeatedly spoken unflatteringly about Michelle. She stated how she wished her husband's mistress would disappear along with the child. Naturally, she had the most compelling motive for committing the crime, but it was not possible to connect the daughter of an influential family with the bloody massacre, at least until investigators found her at the car dealership. So, Lacey added to list of potential suspects. Curiously, bail amounts of $1 million were set for the other detainees, which no one could pay, while only $250,000 was set for Lacey. Everyone thought this was connected to her powerful family, which especially outraged the victim's family. This decision was a real shock. Michelle's mother and sisters thought that this could be a conspiracy and that they were all in danger. Trials against each of the criminals began, starting with Brent's hearing on charges of first-degree murder of Michelle and first-degree assault on her unborn baby. Phillips was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 26 years in prison. At the trial, Brent admitted that Tansy turned him against Michelle by telling him that Michelle will report him to the police because he is involved in banned substance trafficking. A similar situation occurred with a third accomplice. The lie worked with all of this. Tansy was found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter due to the fact that the unborn child died. It was believed that she inflicted the deepest blows with an ice pick that injured the baby. In addition, she was charged with first-degree kidnapping and concealment of material evidence. The punishment chosen was life imprisonment without the right to parole. Furthermore, for all the crimes committed, Tansey received additional sentences under other charges, totaling 19 years. Tansey admitted that she had committed the crime at Lacey's request, while her accomplice David Richards, who provided assistance, received 17 years in prison for complicity in the murder. All these hearings went fairly quickly, but Lacey's case stalled from the very beginning. The lawyer insisted that she did not want to kill anyone, but only intended to intimidate the homewrecker. The murder occurred because the criminals could not control the situation. She continued to claim that it was Tansey who initiated the attack because Michelle planned to report her illicit activities to the police. Lacey removed all responsibility from herself, denying any connection to the criminal acts. Lacey's defense immediately went to work and repeatedly delayed the hearings, prolonging the defendant's freedom. This made the situation even more tense because Lacey had rented a car, what rich woman would rent a car for? All this raised serious doubts. Recordings of telephone conversations between the participants in a conspiracy were analyzed, confirming that Lacey and Tansey called each other many times on the night of the crime. This clearly did not happen by coincidence. Additionally, even during her initial communication with the police, Lacey openly expressed her dislike for Michelle and stated that she wanted her mistress to disappear from their lives forever. Interestingly, when the detectives decided to talk to Lacey's husband, Danny, who started this love triangle, it turned out that he was on the run. This went on for about a week, leading to an arrest warrant being issued for him. It was believed that he was also an accomplice in the conspiracy. At the time of his arrest, Danny Pavek was unemployed. While on the run, he got by with odd jobs. Despite plans to leave Lacey, his alleged complicity was never confirmed by the Supreme Court, which made the case quite confusing. Only a year and a half after Michelle's death, the trial of Lacey began on November 10, 2010. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict against Tansey Mathis. She is charged with aggravated first-degree murder of Michelle Kitterman and first-degree manslaughter for killing Michelle's unborn child. In December 2010, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The very next day after the verdict was passed, Lacey filed an appeal, insisting that the prosecution was biased, her privacy was violated during the collection of evidence, and she pointed out other inconsistencies and violations, none of which were confirmed or were insignificant in light of the crime committed. Her last appeal was rejected in June 2012. Lacey remains behind bars at the Washington Correctional Center for Women. Tansey, David, and Brent are also still in the correctional facility. They will be eligible for parole in 2041. Lacey's mother wrote a book detailing her misadventures connected with her daughter's life imprisonment. However, this book did not achieve much popularity.